You ain't talking about penology.
Yeah, it's that penology. It's gonna be
He's
that
copying, man.
penology.
I'm here for the penology.
Okay. So we're back. Put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me. Put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me. Put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me on YouTube. Put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me in Clubhouse. Con. So we're here, okay? Those of you that are on YouTube, we're gonna post the links in the description. So the links that I will not go into because it's just general information, I will allow you to access the links via the description, right? So I'm just going to summarize what we're going to go into in the links. But there are several links I do have to tune into, so because they're very important, okay? Shalom Eliel, another great historian, right? Right. So yeah, let's get the likes, let's get the likes up, let's get the shares up, because this is gonna be absolutely epic, okay, to the Israelite community. Okay. Some of you may be wondering, well, what is Panah talking about? Greek civilization, Greek culture, right? What is he talking about? You're going to see what I'm talking about. You're going to see. Okay. So let's get started. Let's get started. Let's get started. Okay. The question is, did Israelites shape ancient Greek civilization? An introduction to Israelite migrations within ancient Greek culture, tracing origins through the sea peoples. What is that? You're going to find out. Can I be seen? Did everybody see the can everybody see the presentation? Oh, there we go. Okay. So Lakia, everybody see? All right. God. An introduction. In this presentation, I will demonstrate that biblical nations descending from the 12 tribes of Israel, specifically Judah and Dan today, have not only pioneered Greek mythology and renowned histories, but I will connect how they have been founders of many of the great city-states and civilizations of Greece, Rome, and Asia Minor during early Greek eras. However, due to the rise of quote-unquote Edomite Hellenization, much of this history has been credited to Indo-European fabrications, right? And we got examples of iconoclasm. When you look at coins, when you look at modern day images, you'll think, oh, everybody is this, has this visage of an Edomite. Even the term Indo-European is a modern term, okay? Because what Caucasians desire to do is they try to make themselves indigenous to Greek culture. And I'm going to show you how Edomites, how they adopted Greek culture that Israelites influenced. Whether these fabrications be due to iconoclasm, the altering of frescoes, or the blatant dismemberment of memorabilia to distort historical figures and their original bloodlines, it is an attempt to fracture powerful links to ancient Greek, to ancient Greek histories of old to further validate the Holy Bible. So they don't want the Bible to be validated. Even Greek historians, right, that we're going to go into, they mention men like Moses, etc., etc. Okay, they mention specific characters, and why they want you to believe that these things were unreal is because they don't want any connection to the Bible when it comes to historical tribal names, migrations, epics, etc., because they do not want to validate the Bible. Next slide. Certain mainstream historians will hide national Israelite ties to historical evidences due to the biblical superiority complex of the Israelite race. Because, the Most High said that we're going to be above all nations. Well, they're trying to exterminate that purpose. And I'm going to show you how we had preeminence in Greek culture. We have to get from the understanding of there was only a Samaritan apostasy. There was also a Greek apostasy. There was an Egyptian apostasy. You see that in the book of Jeremiah when the southern kingdom was saying that we're going to go into Egypt and worship who? The Queen of Heaven. Well, they were worshiping the Queen of Heaven in Greece as well, and that pantheon of Babylon, right? That Egypt adopted, and some Israelites took it into Greece. Okay. So it says, therefore, terms like myth or speculation smother truth. Actual epic is myth because it's poetry. Art and tale is saturated within ancient Greek mythology, which can distort literal linguistic. But like today, movies are a form of art that imitates life. So during major Greek eras, the entertainment of the time was saturated with influences from the arts of war, epic, philosophy, theater, and science. So right here, you have a picture, relief at Medinet Habu. The Shurdan peoples depicted with horned helmets from the mortuary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu, right? We're going to learn about what that is. This is 1175 BC, right? These were epics that were in the annals of Ramses III, right? And so you'll see modern movies with these sea crusaders and these pirates pioneering civilizations. Well, majority of that was pioneered by Israelite tribes. Now I want to go back really quick because we had a little bit of technical difficulties earlier, but I want to back up. If you see the horns on their head, this was also worn by who? The Vikings, right? But if you want to learn who the sea peoples are, when Israelites went off into the worship of the horned god and things of that nature, and that apostasy on the left-hand side, look how they depict the sea peoples. Let's go back to this picture. If you can see, do you see the tassels on the four corners of this brother? This was considered a Shekelesh, a tribe called the Shekelesh of the sea peoples. We're going to learn a little bit about them too. They're also in Greek mythology, right? But also look at how they depict the sea peoples in their garments, in their armor. You see the horn, right? And look at the fringes. Look at the fringes, right? Y'all saw Boys in the Hood. Remember when Trey said the penguins? Look at the fringes, right? These are, and you see at the bottom left, it says Hellenic armor. How in the world did Alexander and his generals and those Greek men during the 4th century BC, how come only they're accredited to Hellenization when you have sea peoples dating back all the way to the 13th, 12th century, 11th century BC, and they're labeling this as Hellenic armor? So where did Alexander and those Greeks get that idea of Hellenization? We're going to get into it. See the horns once again on the Shurdan people, sea peoples. Bridging the gap of myth to history. This is a famous historian from the 1st century BC by the name of Diodorus Siculus. We're going to go into him several times in this presentation. He stated, Cadmus, we're going to learn about Cadmus in the future. Cadmus was responsible for bringing the Linear A system, right, of Greek, right, into Greece and into the Isles of Europe and into Europe, right? He's accredited for this, right? And if you understand, the Dorians, which we're going to go into, they're accredited to it too. And we're going to figure out who brought that Linear A system into Greece. So Cadmus, so we're going to go into an example of how art imitates life and how things can get, distorted over time. And you can see their tales and their epics in theater. This is what Diodorus said. Cadmus, who was a citizen of Egyptian Thebes, I wonder who was in Egypt before as well, begat several children, of whom one was Semele. She was violated by an unknown person, became pregnant, and after 7 months gave birth to a child whose appearance was such as the Egyptians hold had been that of Osiris. Now, such a child is not usually brought into the world alive, either because it is contrary to the will of the gods, or because the law of nature does not admit of it. But when Cadmus found out what had taken place, having at the same time a reply from an oracle commanding him to observe the laws of his fathers, he both gilded the infant and paid it the appropriate sacrifices on the ground that there had been a sort of epiphany of Osiris among men. The fatherhood of the child he attributed to Zeus. In this way, magnifying Osiris and averting slander from his violated daughter. And this is the reason why the tale was given out among the Greeks, to the effect that Semele, the daughter of Cadmus, was the mother of Osiris by Zeus. So you see how things can get exacerbated by imagination, right? Now, at a later time, Orpheus, who was held in high regard among the Greeks for his singing, initiatory rites, and instructions on things divine, was entertained as a guest by the descendants of Cadmus. Those are called the Cadmians, by the way, and accorded unusual honors in Thebes. And since he had become conversant with the teachings of the Egyptians about the gods, he transferred the birth of the ancient Osiris to more recent times, and out of regard for the descendants of Cadmus, instituted a new initiation in the ritual of which the initiates were given the account that Dionysus had been born of Semele and Zeus. This is a depiction of Cadmus. By the way, you see him. He was known for slaying the dragon, which is a metaphor, right? That's neither here nor there right now. But look how he look. Look how they have him depicted on this vase, a brother. And the next PowerPoint, I'm gonna show you how Greeks begin to smother or smear the dark skin off of these vases and vases and things of that nature. That's for next time. And the people observed these initiatory rites partly because they were deceived through their ignorance, partly because they were attracted to them by the trustworthiness of Orpheus and his reputation in such matters. And most of all, because they were glad to receive the god as a Greek, which, as has been said, is what he was considered to be. Later, after the writers of myths and poets had taken over this account of his ancestry, the theaters, now, this is a 1st century BC historian telling you about theaters centuries before him. So it says the theaters became filled with it, like you see today, Marvel. Like you see today, they just keep recycling the same story. They might change the tradition a bit, but they keep recycling it. It says the theaters became filled with it, and among following generations, faith in the story grew stubborn and immutable. In general, they say the Greeks appropriate to themselves the most renowned of both Egyptian heroes and gods, and so also the colonies sent out by them. So what's this saying? That there's an adoption of culture that predated what was being displayed as at the time that they were claiming to be the originators of these stories, of these epics, right? This is from his book, Bibliotheca Historica, book 1, section 23, line 4 through 8. This is another picture depicted of Dionysus, who was originally Nicias. We're going to get into that, a real person. It says, this is Dionysus with 2 maenads holding a hare. Now, let's read Proverbs 30 and 26. It says, the conies are but a feeble folk, yet make they their houses in the rocks. This is where you get the ideology of the rabbit hole, right? What do you understand today about when they say we don't want to go down the rabbit hole? That's an ancient Babylonian knowledge of mysticism, to say you have studied the secrets, and when you have hunted the rabbit, like you see in Alice in Wonderland, like you see with Michael Jordan when he was taken by Bugs Bunny and he went in past Saturn and he was taken into space This is when Michael Jordan was going to be deified as a god. Now, if you think about it, 1,000 years from now, and you see the Hall of Fame, and you see Michael Jordan, a statue of him, they're going to say he was the god of basketball. You get it now? It's the same thing what you see with Dionysus, Nicias, etc. Right? All they're doing is pulling a rabbit out of a hat because they went down that rabbit hole into Babylonian mysticism and the Egyptian schools of secret knowledge, masonry, etc. Now, in order for you to understand what I'm talking about, and in order for you to understand what I'm going to get into, right, you have to understand the historical Greek eras. So first, we're going to go into Proto-Greek era, 3000 to roughly 1100 BC. This period includes the early Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations. These are the actual Japhetic people that were in these regions of Anatolia, Turkey, Europe, going into Italy, Greece, the Mycenaean coast, etc., Achaea, right? This is when the actual Japhetic people were there. The Mycenaeans were known for their palaces, Linear B script. That's important to know because we see an evolution of script during a certain specific time when a certain people group showed up in those regions and began to rule and colonize. It was the Linear A script that was introduced. And connections to the Trojan War myths. Now, what they like to do with the Trojan War myth is to say, oh, the Trojan War happened in about 14th century B. No, the Trojan War happened around the 9th century BC. Okay? And we're going to show you who the Trojans were. The Roman fathers, right? And you read about them because they cross paths with Greek mythology because of their epics, right? And they were also tied to Greeks as family. And we're going to get into that. This period encompasses the early migrations and the formation of the Greek cultural and linguistic identity and Aegean civilizations. That Aegean Sea, right? And that whole region. Dark Age. I wonder why they call it Dark Age. Just like they call them medieval times, the Dark Ages, because they don't want you to know something very important about this era right here. It was shortly after the migration of Israel out of Egypt, a few hundred years after, they call that the Dark Ages. I wonder why. Following the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. Hold up. Following the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, I wonder who caused it to collapse in that late Bronze Age period going into the Iron Age. Greece entered a period of reduced cultural and economic activity with fewer written records and smaller communities. Right? So that's from 1100 to roughly 800. They call that the Dark Ages because they don't want you to know. Very important epics during that time. Archaic period, circa 800 to 480 BCE. This era saw the rise of city-states, polis, like Athens and Sparta. The development of the Greek alphabet. That's the Linear A. We're going to get to something important all throughout this concerning the Greek script, right? The birth of philosophy and the creation of epic poetry, including Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So shortly after the Dark Ages, Homer, he does majority of his writings about the quote unquote Dark Ages. I wonder why they're calling it the Dark Ages. Because Homer was writing about Israelites. Classical period, circa 480 to 323 BC. This is when they began to make much of this epic and history of Greece, the Greek culture, the Greek heritage. They begin to present it in the theaters and things of that nature, right? It says, this period is marked by the height of Athenian democracy, the flourishing of art, drama, and philosophy, and the conquests of Alexander the Great. It produced great philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Okay. Hellenistic period. Remember the armor, the Hellenic armor? I wonder why they attribute the Hellen people to this era. You know why? Because they didn't have a culture. Edomites did not have a culture, so they adopted Hellenistic culture, which came from the original Black Greeks. Following Alexander's conquests, Greek culture spread across the Mediterranean and Near East, leading to a fusion of Greek and local cultures. This era saw advancements in science, art, and philosophy. Roman, Greece, and beyond 1st century AD onward, after the conquest of Greece by Rome, Greek culture profoundly influenced Roman art, philosophy, and governance, while Greece itself became a vital part of the Roman Empire, right? We know some of that history, right? Next slide. So here's some fundamentals we're going to learn. You have to know what Phoenician is. You have to know what Greek means, and you have to know what Shittim or Kittim mean. Now, there are links that I'm going to allow you to, get once this is uploaded, and you can read for yourself, because I just don't want to jeopardize the display. You have to know Ionia. You have to know Aeolian and Dorian. Write Dorian down because Dorian is in red for a reason. I remember I was scoffed at on Clubhouse because I was explaining who the Dorians were. Well, we're here now. We're here for the Penology, right? It says the Achaeans. Well, we're not going to go into the Achaeans today, right? But they'll be addressed on another presentation. But these are the 4 major ethnic groups that you deal with when dealing with ancient Greek civilizations. So let me give you some type of information you're going to be getting into. The First Wave of Sea Peoples by Carlos J. Maru, 2020, right? Listen to what he says, right? Concerning the Equesh or the Akawasha, the original Achaeans who came from Anatolia into Achaea. This is what he said. Once established in Cyprus and Canaan, the sea peoples of this migratory wave may have planned the attack on Egypt with the help of the Libyans in order to weaken the Egyptian resistance to their settlement on lands controlled by the pharaoh, both in Canaan and Libya. A contingent of Equesh, Turesh, that's another sea people tribe, and Shekelesh, we're going to go into all of this, warriors who were circumcised, possibly sailed to the west and joined other contingents of sea peoples in Cyprus and the Aegean, belonging to the Shurdan and Luca peoples. They continued their navigation southwards, Egyptians in the Battle of Perea, page 11. Some good history, y'all. Major Greek tribes. So we're going to go into the Ionians, Dorians, and Aeolians. So here's a brief synopsis. Ionians, seafaring Asiatic Greeks descended from Javan, biblical ethnonym, associated with Asia Minor and maritime trade. Now remember the time that I gave y'all concerning that proto-era of Greece, 3000 BC to roughly 1100, even though that's when they mainly collapsed around that time. They amalgamated with Israelites, right? Shortly after the migration out of Egypt, which is roughly dated to the 15th century, 14th century BC. Coastal Greeks shaped by trade networks, migration, and dialect rather than strict ethnic descent. Dorians, very important. Invaders who overthrew the Mycenaeans. Dorian invasion. We're going to go into the Dorian invasion. The mythos of the Dorian invasion was exaggerated. They call that the return of the Heraclidae, just to create the story, just like you see how stories and tales got, muted and exacerbated over time. It's called the Dorian invasion, but these were a multitude of migrations, but they just simply call it Dorian invasion as if it was one epic event. And it wasn't. But these people came from a particular place, and I'm going to prove where they came from. Regional elites. Notice it says regional elites who adopted a Doric identity. See, now here's what's false. It says adopted a Doric identity. They brought the identity of the Doric culture, and I'm going to show you how. Because if you say, oh, Panah, you're going into mythos, and didn't Paul say he read the poets? In Acts 17, he read their poets. Didn't Paul read Homer? Right? You got to understand what is happening in history. So when you talk about Doric identity, do you believe in the Doric story that they tell you about Doris, who they descended from? Doris, that's Greek mythos. I'm going to show you that this is all historical, epic, and proving to you that these were a true people that descended from a true person and not a Greek mythological god that came out of the sky. Okay. Cultural and linguistic shift rather than mass invasion. You see that? So it wasn't just a mass invasion. They caused a cultural shift. Aeolians, transitional or secondary Greek group between Ionians and Dorians. Independent dialect group with deep Bronze Age roots, especially in Thessaly, Lesbos, and Aeolus. This is a map of Mycenaean Greece in 1400 to 1100 BC. You have to know maps when knowing the Bible. You see Crete just south of it. You see Achaea. You see that whole region of Greece. This is the Mycenaean portion of Greece, or the Mycenaean region, right? You can see the islands off of Anatolia. We're going to go into all of that. Okay. Let's go into some deeper understanding. Major Mycenaean centers of Greece and Crete. I want you to get a visual of this because a lot of these places are in the Bible. A lot of these people that come from these places are in the Bible, right? I'm not going to read all through them, right? But you see some striking places. You see Sparta. This is Sparta. He didn't look like that, y'all. He didn't look like Brad Pitt, okay? Leonidas did not look like Brad Pitt, all right? You see Corinth. You also see Thebes, right? That was founded by Cadmus, right? You see Athens, Knossos. When Paul mentions the poets in Acts 17, Epimenides came from Knossos. And this is why he says to Titus that the Cretans are what? Liars and slow bellies. You know why? Because they were responsible for much of the Greek mythos. Yeah, these were Israelites. Okay. Yeah, this is nasty work. Phoenician. Now, just so I don't jeopardize the presentation, you can go on to this link and just look up a simple understanding of Phoenicia. It's going to tell you how they influenced much of those islands, and they call them a Shemitic people. I wonder why they were called Shemitic, because their language was Shemitic, and maybe because they were actually Shemitic, right? Let's read Zechariah 9:2, just to show you that Israel was very much in these places, right? It says, and Hamath also shall border thereby, Tyrus and Zidon, though it be very wise. And Tyrus did build herself a stronghold and heaped up silver as the dust and fine gold as the mire of the streets, because this was like the number one trade port, right? It says, behold, the Lord will cast her out, and he will smite her power in the sea, and she shall be devoured with fire. Mark 3:7. But Yahushua, Jesus, withdrew himself with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem, and from Idumea, and from beyond Jordan, and they about Tyre and Sidon. And a great multitude, when they had heard what great things he did, came unto him. So there's a great multitude of Israelites in Tyre and Sidon. Why do we always think that Israel has to be detained to just their land? Well, they also ruled Tyre, Sidon. They were in Phoenicia. And they were also responsible for much of the outpouring of culture coming from Phoenicia. Acts 11 and 18. When they heard these things, they held their peace and glorified God, saying, then hath God also to the Gentiles granted repentance unto life. Now they which were scattered abroad upon the persecution that arose about Stephen traveled as far as Phoenix and Cyprus and Antioch. Notice it says Cyprus. If you see Cyprus is, you see where it says Elisha. We're going to learn that before it was called a name that we're going to be introduced to, and it's going to be actually epic information. Before that, it was called Elisha. This is where you get Aeolians, Aeolicians. And we're going to learn that the Bible is always going to be remaining true. Preaching the word to none but the Jews only. So the Jews were in these regions, right? But if you look at the map, you see the Phoenician coast. You see Cyprus is south of Anatolia, which is Turkey, right? But if y'all see all the way to the bottom on the coast, there's a city called Dor. We're going to learn a lot about Dor today. A lot.
I remember when Solomon was in war,
Mm-hmm.
Israel was one of the main trading ports of the whole entire world.
Mm-hmm. Come. Greek. So you can look up the Greek definition. It's just simple, basic Greek definition, right? We're going to get into going into how Greek is a language and how Greek is just simply talking about one who's influenced by Greek culture or Greek language, right? So when you read in the New Testament, we're debating all day, Greek, is non-Israelite, Greek, non-Israelite, non-Jewish. I mean, come on, let's throw that away now. You're calling yourself an American, okay? And there's different ethnicities in America. Let's stop. First Maccabees 1:1. And it happened after that, Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Kittim, right, which is Cyprus, right, in many places, and Greece as well. Sometimes it is attributes to Greece as well. It says, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. Now, does it mean he was the first king over Greece? No. Talking about he was the first of his people to rule over Greece. It says, and made many wars and won many strongholds and slew the kings of the earth and went through to the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him, whereupon he was exalted and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host and ruled over countries and nations and kings who became tributaries unto him. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. With this understanding of Phoenician and Greek, right? Understanding that Phoenicians were considered Shemitic people. They influenced much of Europe and those regions of the Mycenaean regions and Anatolia, etc. Right? It says we can clearly deduce that throughout Greek history, countless diverse tribes have settled Greek isles, speaking Greek dialects, and several city-state mainlands and isles have evolved concerning ethnic populations. As we study the sea peoples' migrational patterns to and from the European mainlands and isles, we can also conclude that the Shemitic Phoenician coasts were countless waves of Israelite tribes pioneering major Greek history. This is a book called Hebrew is Greek by Joseph Yehuda. Remember that linear A system that we talked about? This was a very controversial book in 1982. Okay, let's read a little bit about it. The book Hebrew is Greek by Joseph E. Yehuda, published in 1982, is a highly controversial work of philology, going into language, that proposes that biblical Hebrew is fundamentally a dialect of Greek. Now, when he says a dialect of Greek, he's talking about the modern script being can have influences from the Paleo Greek, and he goes into how certain words are, near the same as the Greek, right? Because it's the same linear A system. I wonder who brought that linear A system Hebrews because they worked with a linear A system. Aleph, beta, alpha, beta, alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Okay, that came from our forefathers and the script that they brought from the Levant region, right, into Greece. It says it's a highly controversial work, right, of philology that proposes that biblical Hebrew is fundamentally a dialect of Greek. Yehuda argues that Hebrew and Greek share a common origin in that the ancient Israelites were Hellenes. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. We're here for the Panahology, right? Read that again. Yehuda argues that Hebrew and Greek share a common origin and that the ancient Israelites were Hellenes who spoke a more ancient form of Greek, essentially claiming that Hebrew is camouflage Greek. Sister languages, okay? The book is controversial because its core thesis contradicts well-established mainstream. You know, mainstream, because y'all hiding something, right? They don't want you to roll your boat off stream to the small creeks where the treasure goes and falls to the wayside, right? To the highways and the byways, right? They want you to stay mainstream. They want you to stay wide and broad on that road to destruction. The book is controversial because its core thesis contradicts well-established mainstream historical linguistics, which classifies Greek as an Indo-European language and Hebrew as a Semitic Afro-Asiatic language. See, they created that Indo-European. That's our language, Greek, right? He's telling you that it is clearly an Afro-Asiatic language. They don't want you to think that Greek came from Hebrew. They always try to tell you it's a distinct language, right? Look at the script to the right. You can see the Hebrew, right? Also in the Paleo-Greek, right? And this is the clearly the Paleo forms of the Paleo-Hebrew. It says, these Phoenicians who came with Cadmus and of whom the Gephrians were a part brought, excuse me, with them to Hellas, among many other kinds of learning the alphabet, which had been unknown before this. I think to the Greeks, as time went on, the sound and the form of the letters were changed. This is Herodotus, History's book 5, right? Line 58, section 58. Going into Ionia, you can look up in the Encyclopedia Britannica. These are the Japhetic people. Okay, anytime you see, historians see vases and specific culture of anything that could possibly be Israelite, they say, oh, it's Proto-Ionian, it's Proto-Aeolian, knowing that it is clearly modern invaders, right? Because you can see in archaeology the connections to the coasts of Israel and Phoenicia in these regions. I'm going to prove all of this. You can go into the Strong's H3120, the descendants of Javan, right? It says, one second, Genesis 10:2. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan, and Tubal and Meshech and Teres, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath, and Togarmah, and the sons of Javan, Elisha. Why do I have Elisha red? Remember when Cyprus was called Elisha? Yeah, that's who was on those coasts in Anatolia and in Cyprus before invaders came. Okay, remember Cyprus. Keep it in your subconscious, because later I'm going to show you something very, very pivotal to my point. It says, and Tarshish, Kittim, which is Cyprus, and Dodanim. So the people that came from Elisha, the Aeolicians or the Aeolians, they were in Cyprus and also in Anatolia. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families and their nations. Daniel 8:21. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. Now, this is Alexander. Now, if you see, Grecia right here is going to say Javan or Ionia, but he was not a Japhetic descendant. He was a descendant of Teman. Okay? He was a Temanite. So we can automatically understand that this region where Alexander was, who came from Kittim as well, he was not a descendant of Japheth, but he is in these regions. Okay? So it's talking about the mainland of where he ruled from. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. This is talking about the Diadochi, right? Knowing that Anatolia, now if you look, Anatolia is Turkey, modern day Turkey. I want you to get a visual of these regions. Knowing that Anatolia and Eastern Europe evolved throughout the many eras, the Japhetic people and their tribes were either pushed out through conquest or subdued to lower classes within societies. This is also important to know when deciphering classes into separate ethnic groups of ancient Greek societies. The distinction between Dorian Greeks and the indigenous children of Javan, Ionian, for example, is important to comprehend when embarking on learning ethnologies of the Aegean lands. In order to prove dominant Israelite presence in Greek eras is pivotal for a comprehensive guide when reading Old Testament prophecy, New Testament conversion via the gospel, and eschatological salvation for foreign Israelites, Jeremiah 31:10. Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off. Why? Because these islands that were afar off, Greece, the Mycenaean regions, and these islands, it's hundreds of islands, right? There are main islands and then there are sub islands. But these were Israelites who were far off. It says, who are far off, and say, he that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd doth his flock. The ancient peoples that have established pivotal Greek landmarks and installing Phoenician, Anatolian, Levantine, and Greek culture were of Israelite descent via migrations, i.e. sea peoples, etc. The Ionian people of Javan are also known as the early Mycenaean, early Minoan, early Aeolian, Cycladic Yauna people. See, we just going up on that. Remember last time I gave the allegory when you're going up a roller coaster, you're strapped in now. Now you're going up. We're going to take a deep dive and y'all going to be ooh, ah, real soon. Aeolians. You see Anatolia, see Aeolus. Remember when you saw Cyprus, it was Elisha. Because who descended from Javan? Elisha. The Aeolians, Aeolicians, or Elishians. In the tapestry of ancient Greek civilization, the Aeolians stand as one of the major Hellenic tribes alongside the Ionians and Dorians. The Aeolians traditionally said to descend from the mythic ancestor Aeolus. See? Oh, so are we going to say they descended from a mythic ancestor named Aeolus, or do we just say the Bible says he descended from Elisha? It's going to be the same thing I'm going to prove with Dorian. Did they descend from Doris, a mythical god? Settled initially in Thessaly and later migrated to the western coast of Asia Minor, an area known as Aeolus. Connection to the Greek tribes. While the Ionians are often associated with maritime trade and the Dorians with military prowess, the Aeolians contributed their own cultural and linguistic influence to the Greek world. Each tribe played a crucial role in shaping the character of the Aegean islands and the wider Greek territories. The Aeolians were known for their distinct dialect and their settlements in places like Lesbos and parts of the Anatolian coast. So they had distinct dialects. They weren't using the Linear A script, right? And they had distinct dialects than that of Greek, right? Ezekiel 27:3. How would they know that? Because obviously they were a distinct ethnic group than the Dorians and the later on Achaeans. Ezekiel 27:3. And say unto Tyrus, O thou that art situate at the entry of the sea, which art a merchant of the people for many isles, thus saith the Lord God. O Tyrus, thou hast said, I am of perfect beauty. Fine linen with broidered work from Egypt was that which thou spreadest forth to be thy cell. Blue and purple from the isles of Elisha was that which covered thee. The name Aeolian descends from the Japhetic patriarch Elisha. Kittim or Chittim. You can look up the topical Bible, Chittim, right? It goes into Cyprus, or sometimes it can denote Greece, depending on the context. Genesis 10:4. And the sons of Javan, Elisha and Tarshish, Kittim and Danuna. By these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, every one after his tongue, after their families and their nations. Ezekiel 27:6. Of the oaks of Bashan have they made thine oars. The company of the Asherites have made thy benches of ivory, brought out the isles of Kittim. So when you deal with the ivory, if you notice the Ionians and the Aeolians, they were known for their white ivory sculptures and things of that nature. It says, fine linen with broidered work from Egypt was that which thou spreadest forth to be thy sail. So they were getting fabric from Egypt to make their sails, right? So they were all working together to pass to and fro. You mean to tell me Israel was not a part of that migration? Blue and purple from the isles of Elisha was that which covered thee. This is artifacts from Tel Arad to show you how Judah was involved in trade with Kittim. The Arad ostraca are Hebrew inscriptions found on pottery shards at Tel Arad in Israel, dating back to around 600 BCE. They offer insights into the kingdom of Judah's administrative and military activities. Some of the inscriptions mention the Kittim, believed to be Greek mercenaries or traders, showing their involvement in military logistics. So Judah was involved in the trade, military logistics, etc., with Kittim. The Dorians. Now, I wanted to go on this link, but you're going to have to filter through, kind of, right? Maybe I'll just do another class on the Dorians in this Wikipedia link. But when you read through this link, it's going to give you a brief synopsis, right, of it all. They're going to talk about the Dorian invasion. They're going to talk about a lot of that. Well, we're going to talk about that as well in this presentation. The Dorians were one of the major Greek tribes traditionally linked to regions like Macedonia and Epirus. They migrated, into the Peloponnese and other Greek areas around the 12th century BCE, often referred to as the Dorian invasion. The idea that they came from the north is only an attempt to invalidate the Bible. There is much debate whether they came from the north or Palestine. These next few presentations will prove they came from Palestine and Egypt, linking them to Israelite tribal migrations from Israel after Egyptian exodus, thus proving the biblical narrative. This intentional conjecture is to simply remove them from the list of early sea peoples also arriving to and from the coast of Dor, Israel, Canaan, and create the notion of speculation concerning Israelite existence in those regions. Now, this next link is going to tell you how Dor is practically number one in the forefront of archaeology when studying sea peoples, along with Egypt. We're going to get into some real ancient artifacts. This is Dor, Israel. If you look at it on the map, you can see it's a coastal city along the sea, right? Here's some more pictures of Dor. Dor is mentioned all throughout the scriptures. Ancient Dor, a port city on the coast of ancient Palestine, was a key hub of trade and cultural exchange. Archaeologists have unearthed a variety of artifacts there, from pottery to amphorae, revealing its rich history as a crossroads of the Eastern Mediterranean. A crossroads? It was like a Times Square. They call it a crossroads, meaning you had to go to Dor And Dor had to come to you. I wonder what they're hiding. Joshua 11:1. And it came to pass when Jabin, king of Hazor, had heard those things, that he sent to Jobab, king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Aksaph, and to the kings that were on the north of the mountains, and of the plains south of Chinneroth, and in the valley, and in the borders of Dor on the west. Joshua 11:5. And when all the kings were met together, they came and pitched together at the waters of Merim to fight against Israel. And the Lord said unto Joshua, be not afraid because of them, for tomorrow about this time will I deliver them up, all slain before Israel. Thou shalt howl their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So why am I showing this scripture? Because even in the days of Joshua, which is roughly the 1400s, 1300s, the scriptures say that Joshua and the Israelites slayed these kings, even the king at Dor. So I wonder who had rulership in ancient artifacts that I'm about to show you coming up concerning who was at Dor and who was attached to the sea peoples of Dor. This is the Medinet Habu, right? The Medinet Habu is an ancient Egyptian temple complex on the west bank of the Nile, renowned for its grand mortuary temple of Ramses III and its well-preserved reliefs depicting military victories. So they found inscriptions and papyri and reliefs of sea peoples that got captured when they all banded together with Libya and tried to attack Egypt. The Most High talks about these things in the scriptures, but it goes over people's heads. This is the Harris Papyrus. One of the longest surviving Egyptian papyri details the reign of Ramses III, documenting his donations to temples and his military achievements. This is 1150 BCE, discovered 1855 AD. This was around the times of King Saul, Ramses III, okay, around that time. Well, a little bit before King Saul. This was the time of the judges, excuse me. I was thinking 1050 BC, right? That's around the time of King Saul. The Papyrus Winnemoon. This is what archaeologists who are invested in this sea people understanding in history. The Papyrus Winnemoon is a very pivotal artifact, a very pivotal inscription that you must know. The Papyrus Winnemoon, also known as Papyrus Moscow 120, dates back to around 1075 BCE. Winnemoon, he's an envoy, meets King Beater of the Checker in Dor, who graciously provides him with provisions. So there's a story that the envoy of Winnemoon, he details they found this papyrus amongst the Medinet Habu during the times of Ramses III, is what this was. This story is about around that time, right? But it's something very important. It says that Winnemoon meets a king named Beater of the Checker in Dor. Now, the Checker, some people, because if you deal with language, right? For example, Egypt, they didn't have a letter R in their phonological system. They had L. For example, if you ever hear an Asian speak, like a Chinese person, they don't use L. So when they say really, they really. So how they pronounce words, it gets lost in translation. So some people are saying that Checker, it can definitely transliterate or have increments of the name Shekelesh, which comes from Shekelesh, which is hired one, which could possibly be an Issacharite king who at that time was at Dor. But that's neither here nor there right now. But this is what scholars are saying as well, even archaeologists. Doric king, Joshua 12:7. And these are the kings of the country which Joshua and the children of Israel smote on this side Jordan, on the west, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon, even unto the Mount Halak that goeth up to Seir. which Joshua gave unto the tribes of Israel for possession according to their divisions. The king of Dor and the coast of Dor, 1. The king of the nations of Gilgal, 1. So you can clearly see that Joshua, he eliminates these kings at Dor, right? So I wonder who, by the time when Wintermoon appears, who that king beater was. Ecclesiastes 50 and 25 is very important to understand this, because this is what historians do to cut off the name of Israel. They'll read you a list. We're going to provide a list of the sea people, from the Luca to the Weshesh to the Shurden to the Shekelesh to the Denyen, right? All of these lists that they find in these onomasticons, which is a list of names of the sea peoples, they always have in parentheses next to Peliset, Philistine. Why don't they have any other nation in parentheses? Because they don't care to let you know that that's an Israelite tribe that was a part of the sea peoples. They only say Peliset is Philistines. Why only limit the list to the Philistines, right? Because you want to create everything outside of Israel to be speculation. It's important to know this about the book of Sirach. This is Ecclesiasticus 50 and 25. This is what it says. There be two manner of nations which my heart abhorreth, and the third is no nation. They that sit upon the mountain of Samaria, and they that dwell among the Philistines, and that foolish people that dwell in Shechem. The Philistines, believe it or not, much of the Israelite tribes were amongst those sea peoples with the Philistines. Okay? They were very much involved in the Pentapolis of the Philistines, right? And not only as the sea peoples and their migrations, but even within Sparta, and they begin to mingle in with Philistines. Israelites, yes, they did that. You know, more strikingly, Judah and Dan. But the Lord says that his heart abhors those who dwell among the Philistines. Israelites were pirates. They were raiding ships. Oh, yeah, the story of Wintermoon, it gets very detailed about what happened to Wintermoon when he showed up to Dor. This is what Ramses III boasts about. I slew the Denyen in their islands, and the Checker and the Peliset. Remember the Philistines. Now, notice it says Denyen. Notice it says, Ramses says, I slew the Denyen in their islands. And he says, in their islands. Wait a minute. So there's a people group called the Denyen, and they had islands? Okay. And the Peliset were made ashes. The Shurden, which they relate to Sardinia, and the Weshesh, which some say could be a derivative or a corruption of Asher, of the sea were brought as captives and settled in Egypt. I destroyed those who invaded my borders, the Shurden, the Checker, the Peliset, the Denyen. Don't this sound like Sirach 50 and 26? That the Israelites dwelling amongst the Philistines? The Denyen and the Weshesh, I caused them to be as those who exist no more. I settled them in strongholds, bound in my name. I made them tributary. This emphasizes the defeat of the Checker and their settlement at places like Dor. Notice it says their settlement at places like Dor. I just showed you how Joshua slayed the kings. He settled those places. The Israelites began to settle there and settle in Canaan. So by the time of 1150, by the time of 1050 BCE, etc., when the story of Wintermoon happened, Israelites were there ruling. I wonder who King Beater was. It says, making it perfect for historical context. The boast of Pharaoh Ramses III in the Great Harris Papyrus, 1150 BCE, recording Egypt's victory over the sea peoples, Shurden, Checker, Peliset, Denyen, and Weshesh, and their subsequent resettlement in Egyptian contributaries, right? So he put them back under his thumb. Now, this is the story of Winnemoon. This is what they got out of the translation. This is what Winnemoon says. Because he was an envoy coming from Egypt to go make a trade at Dor with the Checker, who are also, when you go into Greek mythology and you deal with Teucer, or you deal with the Teucrians, who intermarried with Dardanus and the Dardanians, this is where much of Greek mythology is birthed. But these were patriarchal people at one point. This is what Winnemoon says. It says, we will surely do as Amun-Re, king of the gods, our Lord has said. I stayed until the 4th month of the summer season in Tennis, and Nesbenebed and Tentamoon sent me forth with the ship's captain Menegabet, and I went down upon the great sea of Syria in the 1st month of the summer season, and I arrived at Dor, a checker town, and Beater its prince caused to be brought to me 50 loaves, 1 flagon of wine, and 1 haunch of an ox. I mean, bread and wine, that sound like something Israelites present all throughout the scripture. Bread, wine, haunch of an ox. And the man of my ship fled after stealing 1 vessel of gold worth 5 deben, 4 jars of silver worth 20 deben, and a bag of silver 11 deben. Total of what he stole: gold 5 deben, silver 31 deben. So he clearly got hijacked. That sounds like a Northern Kingdom Israelite, right? He got hijacked at Dor, right? Because that was big in that time. They were chasing gold. They were chasing power. It was colonization season. So that what was taking place. They were stealing each other's booty, you name it. Judah and Dan. This is what it says. Ezekiel 27:3. And say unto Tyrus, O thou that art situate at the entry of the sea, which are a merchant of the people of for many isles, thus saith the Lord, O Lord God, O Tyrus, thou hast said, I am perfect in beauty, I am perfect beauty. Thy borders are in the midst of the seas. Thy builders have perfected thy beauty. Listen what it says when you jump down to verse 17. Judah and the land of Israel. So it wasn't just Judah. It says Judah and the land of Israel, they were thy merchants. They traded in thy market wheat of Minnith and Panah and honey and oil and balm. Dan also and Javan going to and fro occupied in thy fairs. Bright iron, cassia, and calamus were in thy market. So clearly the Bible is substantiated that Israelites were seafaring people. But why aren't they giving you the list of names of the sea people and the people that they're connected to? Why is everything speculation when linking them to Israel? But how is this important to Greek heritage? Oh, because it takes a ship to get into the Mycenaean region. And I'm going to show you how all of this is connected from the land of Israel into these regions, and how we created Israelite civilizations in Greece, Anatolia, Eastern Europe, etc. Then you'll understand the Bible a bit more clearer in the New Testament. This is a relief of the sea peoples at the Medinet Habu, right? Depicting the Denyen. Now, if you could see a little bit, it's not really clear, but this is the sea battle during the times of Ramses III, the sea people's coalition. See, it was a coalition. It says, including the Denyen, sometimes linked by some scholars to the Danuna, dated 1175 BC during the New Kingdom Egypt year 8 campaign. Now notice the plumes or the feathered headwear, right? They always say, oh, the Philistines wore that, but I'm going to show you how that began to also be influenced in the Spartan culture, which were Israelites, okay, the Lacedaemonians, etc. Okay, so where did they get that from? Okay, where did they get these plumes from? These are the variations of Dan in their different distinct areas when they find them in inscriptions, reliefs, etc. Denyen or Danuna, the Eastern Mediterranean part of the sea peoples, they were, whenever you see them in inscriptions, they either link them to Denyen or Danuna in this region. The Danuns or Danoi was in the Greek world, especially linked to Homeric Greek. So when Homer is literally calling Greeks Danuns, they were known as Danuns in the ancient world. I wonder who Danuns or Denoi. I wonder who they are. So I got in quotes Tanaju or Tanaya because there's one historian who speculates the Tanaya. And I'm going to go further into why he speculates to prove my point as well about them being the rulers in the Mycenaean and Eastern European regions of that time. Mentioned in Egyptian records, another sea people group, Denyen or Denenim, variants also linked to sea peoples and Levantine coast. So they're linked to the sea peoples. They're linked to the Greek world. They're linked to the Levantine coast, right? Judges 5:2. It says, praise ye the Lord for the avenging of Israel when the people willingly offered themselves. Gilead abode. Now we know this is Deborah's song. Gilead abode beyond Jordan. And why did Dan remain in ships? Asher. Oh, we're going to get into Asher a little bit. Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breeches. So it said, why did Dan remain in ships? I wonder what Dan was doing in those ships. This is another relief at Medinet Habu, right? Y'all need to look into what the Medinet Habu is in Egypt. These are captured sea people from Medinet Habu, 1177 BCE. Notice the feathered headdresses or the plumes. Notice that. Keep that in your mind for what's going on later. Now, we just still going up, y'all. We have not even taken that deep dive. It's going to get exciting, so hold on to your butts. What did Samuel Jackson say in Jurassic Park 1? Hold on to your butts. All right, man. I'm going left. But anyway, Sea Peoples. This is a book by Sir Alan Henderson Gardner. Now, for all y'all over there, why is he quoting a white man? You don't like the white man. You need a liar. Didn't the Bible say his tongue shall fall upon himself? I'm pretty sure he didn't know that Israelites were going to wake up by the Spirit and figure this out. Didn't the scripture say that his tongue is going to fall upon himself? Didn't it say he shall accomplish a diligent search? Well, this guy accomplished a diligent search and he found a lot. This is from his book called The Ancient Egyptian Onomastica, which is a list of names. When you find a list of names, they normally call it an onomastica. So Sir Alan Gardner was a prominent Egyptologist, best known for his extensive work on ancient Egyptian language and text. Most of the information of those tribes, however, comes from two slightly later Egyptian sources. The first source, the Onomasticon of Amenopi, this is from his book, dates from the end of the 12th or beginning of the 11th century BC. That document contains a list of names: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gaza, Asher, Shurden, Checker, and Philistia. That is, the three coastal cities of the Philistines are mentioned. In the view of several scholars, it may also include the Israelite tribe of Asher. Hold on. You mean to tell me that this Egyptologist who was experienced in language and text is saying that one of the list of the sea peoples may be of the tribe of Asher? I wonder what was written in this Onomasticon. I wonder why Deborah said, and Asher remained on his coast. Right? We know Dan or Denyen, right, is all throughout the sea coast. We see them all over, right? What we just went through, what we just presented. But it says, in the view of several scholars, it may also include the Israelite tribe of Asher, which ruled over an enclave adjoining its territory in the Akko plain, and three tribes of sea peoples. Dang. So it may make up other tribes of the sea peoples. It can thus be assumed that the Checker and Shurden had also seized a number of areas on the coast of Israel. So he's confusing his head like, man, they might have seized it. No, the people who settled there seized it in the times of Joshua. This is page 24. right, of his book. This is the onomasticon of Amenopi, which he quoted, right? It says Asheru is listed among geographical names in the onomasticon of Amenopi. Specifically, it appears in a section listing foreign towns, regions, or peoples that were known to the Egyptians. In other words, it falls under the category of place or ethnic group names alongside other known cities or tribes, such as Ashkelon and the Checker, listed in similar contexts dating to the late 12th to 11th century BC. That's the late Bronze Age, when it collapsed because Israel was destroying everything around them. If you know anything about the Amarna letters, I believe the Rib-Hada, the letter of Rib-Hada to the Egyptian king, man, they was getting their behinds whooped over there. Okay? Because Israelites were settling Canaan and going into other regions outside of Canaan as well. Right? But it says dating to the late 12th to the early 11th century BCE, the onomasticon of Amenopi mentions Asheru, highlighting the interconnectedness of ancient peoples during that era. So Israelites were interconnected with the people of that area concerning sea peoples, meaning they were using the sea to colonize, using the sea to trade, etc., etc. So how is this helping your argument about the Greek civilizations? Well, you have to be a part of a seafaring people to get to islands. You have to get from one place to another. So they were very much involved in colonization and sea trading, etc., etc., and were a very seafaring people. Now, it's another image of Dor. Dor is located to the south of this seacoast country. So when you look at the seacoast country of Asher, Dor is just south of it. If you look at this map, excuse me, told you I'm a little bit under the weather. This is Eric H. Klein, American author, historian, archaeologist, historian, professor of ancient history and archaeology at George Washington University in DC. This is from his book, 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed. We just read in the Medinet Habu, right, when the sea peoples attacked Egypt, right? That was linked to the Sea People War of Ramses III in 1177. Listen to what he says. In fact, there are traditions, especially literary traditions, which specifically state that the sea people settled Tel Dor. So the literary traditions are what the historians are saying, and the ancient historians. It says, in the north of what is now modern Israel. Listen to that again. In fact, there are traditions, especially literary traditions, which specifically state that the sea peoples settled Tel Dor. I wonder who that is. In the north of what is now modern Israel. For example, the Egyptian story called the Report of Winnemoon, we just learned about that, y'all, which dates to the first half of the 11th century BC, refers to Dor as a town of the Checker or Sickles, Shekelesh. See, I didn't make that up. They're interchangeable names, Sickles, and they say that they have a lot, archaeologists say that they have a lot to do with the civilization of Sicily. Remember the historian Diodorus Siculus? He was Diodorus of Sicily. Okay? Modern name. So Shakal Ash, they say, could be man of the higher, which goes into Yashash Shakar. Because remember, the R and the L, they don't, the Egyptian text, they don't have the L. I mean, they don't have the R in their system. Right? So there could be some type of corruption of the name Shekelesh. But they're saying that. Another Egyptian text, the Onomasticon of Amenopi, which dates to circa 1100 BC, lists the Shardana, the Checker, and the Peliset, and also mentions the sites of Ashkelon, Ashdod, and Gaza. 3 of the 5 sites considered to be part of the Philistine Pentapolis. Those are the 5 cities that they came in when they migrated. You can read that in Amos chapter 9. Sites along the Carmel coast and in the Akko Valley, as well as perhaps Tel Dan. Hold on. Let's read that one more time. It says sites along the Carmel coast and in the Akko Valley, as well as perhaps Tel Dan. Tel Dan is very famous in archaeology. Have also been suggested as having been settled by the sea peoples. Who settled Tel Dan? Who settled Akko Valley? Name me a people group. Name it. I could say it. Israelites. What? Wait, Panah. What are you just saying? Your panology? Huh? Don't you believe in the Bible? Name me a people group that settled that region in these times. Have also been suggested as having been settled by the sea peoples, such as the Shardana and the Danuna. Now, remember, we talked about the Tanaya. Now, I'm not saying that the Danuns are the Tanaya, but just the fact that this historian by the name of Jeffrey P. Emmanuel, he tries to connect the Danunim to Tanaya, shows you how the Danunim or the Danuns or the Danuai, they were well known for being the people who were in the Mycenaean Greek regions. Okay, this is from his book, Black Ships and Sea Raiders, the late Bronze and early Iron Age context of Odysseus' second Cretan line. So what is he talking about? He's talking about how, you know, what we were talking about earlier, how everything kind of became a mythos, right? But these were actual events that took place. So he's just breaking this down into actual historical records and accounts. It says Tanaya and the Danuns. This is from chapter 4. Danunim may also be related to Tanaya, a term thought to refer to some part of the Greek world. Listen to that. Danunim may also be related to Tanaya, a term thought to refer to some part of the Greek world. So just the simple fact that he is trying to connect them to Tanaya shows you how much influence the Danunim had in the Greek world. It says, perhaps the mainland of Greece, the Danunim, some possible ties to the Tanaya. So I'm not going to go too much into this. So what he's trying to connect is during the times of the 18th dynasty, which they date to a time around the time of when Israel left Egypt, during the time of Thutmose III, there's an inscription in Karnak. This is an image of Karnak, in Karnak of the inscriptions that they found, right? This is from Thutmose III when they mentioned the Tanaya, right? But listen to what he says. So they're going into a trade, right? During the times of Thutmose III at Karnak. He's talking about, you know, stuff that he was receiving from the Mycenaean region. It says each base features a list of toponyms on its front and sides, written onto the lower bodies of bound kneeling individuals in a form referred to as captive ovals. The names featured on the base containing the term Tanaya make up what is commonly known as the Aegean list of Amenhotep III. So now when you read about Amenhotep III, he predates Thutmose III. So Amenhotep, right? Now he considers the people of the Mycenaean region to be the Tanaya. So now here goes this author saying, man, the Danunim, they were so prevalent and they were so vast throughout that region of the Mycenaean region and that Aegean region that they could possibly have some connection to the Tanaya, right? This is what he's coming up with, because they make the Aegean list a lot. It says at least 14 of the 17 inscribed terms have been identified with locations in the Aegean, including Knossos, that's in Crete. All this is in Crete. Amnisos, Phaistos, and Cydonia on Crete, the island of Kythera, and Mycenae, Narpelon, Messenia, and the Thebaid on the Greek mainland, right? So he's just saying the Danuna, they have to have some connection to the Tanaya, right? Because they're so prominent in these regions, especially Crete, especially Greece in the mainland, etc. Clearly, the Danuna, a later Bronze Age people, are being historically related to populations that Egypt earlier called Tanaya, which referred to Mycenaean Greece or part of the Aegean world. Philistine or Israelite. One second. Philistine or Israelite. This is from a book called Mediterranean Peoples and Transition, 389, page 389. This is a woman by the name of Trude Dalton, who this book was dedicated to, right? She went to the Hebrew University. She was a major archaeologist in Israel, right? So we're gonna go into some of her stuff as well. But this is what it says in this book. One reading of the archaeological record of the site in this respect put forward and argued for by the first director of the project. This is when they went to go excavate Dor. It says, and is that the aggregate of Aegean looking and Philistine looking objects and attributes found at Dor in the Iron One, that's an age, should be identified as representing Shekelian. Remember, shekel. Remember, sickles. Remember, checker. It's interchangeable. Material culture, and consequently that similar phenomena in other sites in northern Israel should be interpreted as the material manifestations of other non-Philistine sea peoples. So what they're saying is the culture, right, of the Aegean, of the sickles, and those that they found at Dor were non-Philistine. More specifically, this hypothesis posits the existence of 4 distinct ethnic political periods and 3 cultural transformations within the terminal late Bronze Age, early Iron Age at Dor. We've been going over this from the time Israel left, then they settled and created their kingdom in that region. It says Iron Age at Dor. At the end of the Bronze Age, the Canaanite town is taken over and the population supplanted. What does Jacob's name mean? Supplanted by, or at least augmented to, and ruled by sickles. Sometime after winter moons, remember winter moon, ostensible visit to Dor, Phoenicians destroy and take over the sickle town. See, now this is where they it gets kind of sticky. You know what I'm saying? Like where we could talk about this another time. But it says later on, Israelites under David capture the Phoenician town and make it their own. Dor is re-Phoenicianized. What was I telling y'all about Hiram the other day? That's neither here nor there. According to this view, only in the Persian period, and that event is recorded in Eshmun Azar's inscription for an extensive exposition. A different version, argued by Rabban, sees only a tripartite Canaanite, sea people, Israelite cultural division, omitting the early Phoenician interlude altogether. This essay will argue for yet another reading of the same record that the cultural sequence at Dor in the early Iron Age is characterized by continuity rather than upheavals. So what they're saying is, what did the Bible say when the Bible says Israelites went in, they ruled over them, but they didn't push them all out? That's what they're saying, right? This is going to connect and it's going to make sense as we start from Israelites' exodus out of Egypt, the sea peoples, and their interconnectedness in the Aegean world and Greece, etc., right? But you have to know this first. It says, and it essentially documents the gradual transformation of the late Bronze Canaanite culture into the Iron Age Phoenician one, and that the foreign sea people's impact on the local material culture should be understood differently than hitherto proposed. Next. This is Trude Dalton's book, The Philistines and Their Material Culture, right? I'm going to read from kind of the middle. It says the Winnemoon tale mentions the port city of Dor and its ruler Beater, king of the Checker, one of the sea peoples who invaded Egypt. The pottery from the Iron Age levels consisted of 2 fragments of Philistine jugs. Photos have been published, right? We're going to move over to the next paragraph, and we don't need to know all of that. It says the excavator compared the bowl with a larger Philistine bowl from Ashkelon, but found that the 2 jug sherds were unlike the pottery commonly associated with the Philistines. The excavator believed the difference to result from the fact that Checker material culture was, in his opinion, similar to, but not identical with, that of the Philistines. So clearly, these weren't the Philistines. Oh, the sea people's all the Philistines. These were Israelites. It says, it appears, however, that all 3 vessels are indeed readily identifiable as Philistine pottery of phase 2 and are roughly contemporary with the journey of Winnemoon. Moreover, Philistine pottery and that associated with the Checker are identical. The contrast arises only from the fact that there is no evidence of an early phase of Philistine pottery at Dor. So they're just trying to look into the phases, but the ultimate conclusion is that the Philistines, right, there was a people group called the Israelites, the Sickles, or the Sea Peoples, the Checker, right, who were considered the to be connected to the Sea Peoples, etc. Right? So they showing you Israelite presence there and the culture of Israelite being distinct, right? In the Checker, right? But remember, the Lord says he abhorred those who dwelt among the Philistines. So of course, Israel amalgamated within the Philistines, but we don't see a Philistine rulership at that time in northern Israel. They were more to the south at Judah, at that Philistine Pentapolis when they arrived there, right? During the late Bronze Age. This is Israelite settlement at Dor. This is a coin, right? And you see the paleo script and the ship. I wonder what that denotes. A coin depicting a Phoenician ship discovered at Dor in northern Israel. Notice the Hebrew script belonging to Dor. That's what it's saying. Joshua 17 and 11. And Manasseh had in Issachar and in Asher Bashin in her towns, and Ibleam in her towns, and the inhabitants of Dor in her towns, and the inhabitants of Endor in her towns, and the inhabitants of Tanakh in her towns, etc., right? We're going to go down to verse 12. It says, yet the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. So you see the culture and the mingling of the cultures when you see the pottery, etc., etc. But listen to what it says. Who was the rulers of that time? Listen to what it says. So they didn't drive them all out the land. We know that. That's in the scriptures. That's prevalent. It says, verse 13, yet it came to pass when the children of Israel were waxing strong that they put the Canaanites to tribute, but did not utterly drive them out. So that means you're in rulership if you put them to tribute. So that was happening during the late Bronze Age. So I wonder who that was when Winnemoon showed up, right? When he got hijacked. First Chronicles 7 and 29. And by the borders of Manasseh, Bethshean in her towns, Tanakh in her towns, Megiddo in her towns, Dor in her towns. In these dwelt the children of Joseph, the son of Israel. Ephraim, believe it or not, and Manasseh was connected to Greece as well. Okay, those are for later presentations. This is a man who is all throughout Greek mythology and history by the name of Danaus. 1st century BC historian Diodorus Siculus quotes historian Hecataeus of Abdera, right? Since we are up, this is 360 BC, 290 BC. Hecataeus of Abdera lived in the 4th and 3rd century BC. Since we are about to give an account of the war against the Jews, we consider it appropriate before we proceed further, in the first place, to relate the origin of this nation and their customs. In ancient times, a great plague occurred in Egypt, and many ascribed the cause of it to the gods, who were offended with them. For since the multitudes of strangers of different nationalities who lived there made use of their foreign rites and religious ceremonies and sacrifices, the ancient manner of worshiping the gods practiced by the ancestors of the Egyptians had been quite lost and forgotten. Therefore, the native inhabitants concluded that unless all the foreigners were driven out, they would never be free from their miseries. All the foreigners were forthwith expelled, and the most valiant and noble among them, under some notable leaders, were brought to Greece and other places, as some relate. The most famous of their leaders were Danus and Cadmus. Remember, we learned about Cadmus. They accredit him to bringing the Linear A system into Europe, which is connected to Hebrew, a Phoenician script. But the majority of the people descended into a country not far from Egypt, which is now called Judea, and at that time was altogether uninhabited. So he just given a brief synopsis that eventually they went to Greece, right? They came from Egypt. Majority of them settled in Judea because at that time you had the Jews there. That's from book 40, chapter 3, lines 1 through 8. Let's read Psalms 80 and 8. It says, "Thou hast brought a vine out of Egypt. Thou hast cast out the heathen and planted it." So the Most High planted his vine and his people. Thou preparest room before it and didst cause it to take deep root, and it filled the land. So the Lord is calling Israel a vine out of Egypt. Believe it or not, the Epicureans, they called their philosophy a vine of Egypt. Look that up. Look that up, people. Historical migrations from Egypt. Book 1, line section 28. Right? This is what it says. It says, now the Egyptians say, this is Diodorus Siculus. Now the Egyptians say that also after these events, a great number of colonies were spread from Egypt over all the inhabited world. To Babylon, for instance, colonists were led by Belus, who was held to be the son of Poseidon and Libya. So where did the Ethiopians come from and the Africans come from when they went to Babylon? Cush, believe it or not, is called Bel, right? So they're going into history. And after establishing himself on the Euphrates River, he appointed priests called Chaldeans, the Kashdees, or the people of Arpachshad, which our people come from, which Abraham comes from, by the Babylonians. Remember, Terah was a worshiper of their idols. It says, who were exempt from taxation and free from every kind of service to the state, as are the priests of Egypt. And they also make observations of the stars, following the example of the Egyptian priests, physicists, and astrologers. They say also that those who set forth with Danus, likewise from Egypt, settled what is practically the oldest city in Greece, Argos, and that the nation of the Colchi in Pontus, which is Anatolia. Who are the Colchi? If you read 1 Kings chapter 4, it says Solomon were wiser than specific sons that were born of Zerah. Calcol, Ethan, and Heman. These were also kings. Israelites were in kingdoms and created kingdoms even around Solomon's kingdom. Okay? We're going to get into that. And that of the Jews. So let me read this again. They say also that those who set forth with Danus, likewise from Egypt, settled what is practically the oldest city in Greece, Argos. So the people that left with Danus settled in practically the oldest city in Greece, Argos, the Argives. And that the nation of the Colchi and Pontus and that of the Jews, which lies between Arabia and Syria, were founded as colonies by certain immigrants from their country. So Colchi, coming from Calco, Danus, quote unquote Dan, we're going to get into that, founded colonies they were considered immigrants from Egypt. It says, and this is the reason why it is a long established institution among these two peoples to circumcise their male children, the custom having been brought over from Egypt. I wonder who brought it over. Even the Athenians, they say, are colonists from Sais in Egypt. Wait, Panah, panasophy and vain deceit, panology, right? Some say Ethan, one of those sons of Zerah, could possibly be transliterated Athenos or Athens, but that's neither here nor there right now, right? And they undertake to offer proofs of such a relationship, for the Athenians are the only Greeks who call their city Asti, a name brought over from the city of Asti in Egypt. So the people that came out of Egypt at some point called Athens Asti, a city where they once dwelt in Egypt. This is from a fragment 16 of Hecataeus of Abdera in his book called the Catalog of Women, right? These are poets. Remember Paul talked about these poets? Panah, poets. Paul read them too. It's just a story where poetified, if you want to call that a word. It says this about, Hecataeus says this about Argos. Argos, which was waterless, Danaus made well watered. I wonder who that's speaking about. This is Dan. Why did he remain in ships? This is from a man by the name of Yigiel Yadin, right? It says, and Dan, why did he remain in ships? This is from page 20. It says, the Denai in the coast of Jaffa. We know that's Joppa. That's where Dan resided, in Joppa and that coast. The close ties between the coast of Palestine and the Denai, or their heroes, according to Greek tradition, as well as the fact that the Denai constitute the third element among the groups of the peoples of the sea who fought against Ramses III, the other two being the Philistines and the Checker, would appear to provide a basis for the assumption that part of the Denai also settled along the shores of Palestine, since the Philistines settled from Jaffa southwards, while the Checker made their home. I wonder who those are, but they don't have no idea. Made their home in the vicinity of Dor, the only area which comes into consideration for the Denai is that which stretched between Dor and Jaffa or Joppa. That was the land of Dan. This is from page 22, the Denai. From the information available in both historical and historical mythological sources, it is possible to ascertain the following facts. The tribe of the Denai originates in the east, and the introduction of the alphabet to Greece is attributed to it. We're going to read that one more time for the scoffers. The tribe of the Denai originates in the east, and the introduction of the alphabet to Greece is attributed to it. Its members were outstanding seamen who had some special connection with sun worship. Remember, they was going off in the worship of the sun. If you look at the slide in the beginning, between the horns was the depiction of the sun. Remember in Ezekiel chapter 8, he was saying how the Israelites was looking east with a sunrise because they were worshiping the sun, right? They were worshiping Horus, Tammuz. So you get horizon, Horus rising. They were worshiping the sun as it rises from the east. They were sun worshipers, which the Most High was provoked to anger from. It says its heroes in a special capacity for asking riddles. Sections of this tribe wander as warrior bands, invaded various places and established cities which they named for the fathers of the tribe. Right? So where they went, They would name the place Denmark. They would name it Danuna, Denunim. We're going to get into some ancient inscriptions, by the way. Since he's making it up, I'm making it up. We're going to prove it. Prove all things. It says, sections of the tribe of the Danai are particularly associated with the Eastern Mediterranean, literal and general, in the vicinity of Jaffa in particular. So they originate them from Joppa or Jaffa. That was page 22, I believe. This is from page 23, same book. Hecataeus, that's Hecataeus of Abdera. We're learning about historians, y'all. Commences his essay on the Jews with the Exodus. Once a pestilence broke out in Egypt, we learned about this, which the local inhabitants attributed to the wrath of the gods. The Egyptians therefore resolved to expel the strangers. The best and most courageous of the strangers united together and went forth to Greece and other countries. And their most famous leaders were Danus and Cadmus. Believe it or not, they say that Cadmus could possibly come from the word Quadam, which is what? East. They called him a Phoenician, but he brought that script from that region into where? Greece, Israel. But most of the people went to Judea, which was entirely desolate in those days. The link which Hecataeus establishes here between the exodus from Egypt and the arrival of Danaus and Argos may possibly be the first case in which Greek mythology has been combined with the narrative in the Torah. It is hard to know what the sources of Hecataeus can have been. So they say, well, where could he have learned this? The Bible, because it was clearly historical at that time, right? It is hard to understand why he saw fit to associate the people of Israel and the Danai in the story of the Exodus. The only possibility which comes into consideration here is that precisely as in the details of his essay on the Jews, wherein he used information he received from Jews here and there. So he may have heard of the Exodus from Jews. The question is, did he hear about the Exodus only from Jews himself, combining this with the departure of the Danai? Or were there some Jews who linked the Jews and the Denians together? Page 23. So we at the top of the roller coaster, and we about to take a deep dive, y'all. It's going to get exciting. Remember True Dolphin, right? What does she say? She's an archaeologist. What does she say about the claims when linking the tribe of Dan to all of the different names of Dan in history? The Denim, the Danuna, the Denui, the Denyen. What does she say? It says there were also fragments. This is from page 84 in her book, The Philistines and Their Material Culture. There were also fragments of a large crater. So they're finding these objects, these cultural vases and things of that nature is in jar. It says with vertical handles, the latter followed the local Canaanite tradition, but was decorated with a well-executed Philistine bird and a monochrome geometric design. Near the store jar lay fragments of a typical Philistine stirrup jar. The crater may be of local manufacture and a derivative of Philistine pottery. The other finds are more typical of the pottery of Philistia. This combination may indicate both trade connections and local limitations. The catch can help ascertain the background of the Danite conquest and settlement at Laish, which probably took place in the middle of the 12th century. This is an archaeologist. Watch this. Remember Yadin, what we just read? Oh, he's pseudo. This is what an archaeologist said and actually substantiated his claim to be valid. A connection between the tribe of Dan and the Danuna, a tribe of the sea peoples, not mentioned in the Bible, because they don't call them Danuna in the scriptures, they're Dan, was suggested by Yadin, who equated the two tribes. The nature of the Tel Dan catch, because she was in Tel Dan researching here. This was not at Dor. This was in Tel Dan when they were researching in Tel Dan. Listen to what they said concerning Yadin's claims. The nature of the Chaldean catch tends to support this proposal and points to the common cultural background of the sea people. So at Chaldean, they're saying that they definitely had connection to the sea peoples. So who are the Denyen? Who brought Greek into Argos? Who brought culture into Greece? The Danuns that were called Greeks by Homer. You're here for the Penology. I had to say that. I'm not very boastful, but I just say that out of comedy. This is called, I told y'all we're about to take a deep dive. This is the Keratipi and Chinnikoi inscriptions found in southern Anatolia, okay? Where the regions of Troy to the north of Anatolia were Trojans, which we're going to show you that they were Israelites, Romans, the origins of the Romans who found their way in Greek mythology. Where's Paul from, y'all? Tarsus in Cilicia. This is the Keratipi and Chinnikoi inscriptions. The Keratipi and Chinnikoi bilingual inscriptions because they had a Luwian and Phoenician script. So there was combination. So was it all Hittites or was there Phoenicians in this region? It says from the 8th century BCE, provide a strong evidence linking the region of Adanawa, modern Adana in Cilicia. So that region was called Adana. Remember, Dan would go around calling lands after their father, Dan. It says to the ethnym Denyen in both Luwian and Phoenician text. So they're translating out of Phoenician text and Luwian text the word or the name Denyen. The Keratipi inscription and the Chinnikoi inscription dating to around the 8th century BCE both use the name Adanawa and reference the people as Denyen, firmly anchoring them in ancient Cilicia. So they were anchored in this region. So if you look on the map, remember what's south of Anatolia? Cyprus. Remember when it was called Elisha? Remember Elisha, Javan? Remember when they talked about the proto-Aeolician and the proto-Ionian people? They were their kingdoms and their civilizations collapsed. This is when Israel came in there, and then now you have a Greek culture. Remember, Hebrew is Greek. Remember that. South of Cilicia or Turkey is Cyprus. Let's study Cyprus real quick. Let's study Cyprus real quick. See how I'm Cyprus. This is a picture of the Keratipi and Chinnikoi inscriptions, right? Sorry that it got blocked off a little bit, but look at look what we have here in these inscriptions. The Keratipi and Chinnikoi inscriptions in ancient Anatolia or Turkey, right? Look at it. Look at the history. It's called the bilingual inscription because there's Luwian and Phoenician script. This is a deep. Y'all going down now off the roller coaster. Hold on to your butts. This is the Kition stela, right? Stele, however you pronounce it. The Kition stele, 707 BCE, was erected by Sargon II in Cyprus. If y'all don't know who Sargon II is, they have his annals in Assyria. He ruled after Salmanassar V, who the Bible says sacked Samaria. Okay. Now they're like, well, who sacked Samaria? Because Sargon II makes it clear that he took 27,000 nobles out of Samaria into Assyria. But he has inscriptions as well, because remember, when the Assyrians made their campaign to the west, they began to push Israelites to the west. Okay? Because they didn't just stop in Israel, right? Remember, they went in Laish, they went in all these regions. And even they say which we're going to get into, Dan and many other tribes fled to Western Europe. I wonder who the Milesians were. Miletus is in Anatolia. I wonder who these people are, these royal oligarchy aristocratic families. Remember Corneli, the Corneli. Remember Leo Scipio Africanus Major said he descended from the Trojans. Okay. I'm just saying, remember when I said that. I mean, we're going to put everything to the fire. But let's read this. Let's read this inscription. This is from 707 BC. This is when he was campaigning in Cyprus. That's what he said. The Kition Stele, 707 BC, was erected by Sargon II in Cyprus. He records the submission of Cypriot kings to Sargon II. So Cypriot is the region of Cyprus. So the Cypriot kings, there was 7 Cypriot kings. Listen to what he called Cyprus. Remember, proto era, it was Elisha. It says, proving Assyrian control and influence over Cyprus. Listen to what it says. Yadnana, and marking the island's integration into the Neo-Assyrian imperial network. It says, this is what his inscription was. It says, at that time, I had a stele fashioned in the symbols of the great gods, my lords. I engraved thereon my royal image, imploring for my life. I set before them. I inscribed thereon the names of the lands that from the rising sun to the setting sun, with the aid of Ashur, Nabu, and Marduk, the gods, my helpers, I had subjugated to the yoke of my rule. So he's saying he subjugated the Cypriot kings to his rule. But listen to what he calls it. I set it up on Baali Bori, the mountain, located at the top of the land of Adnana. Cyprus was called the land of Adnana. What? It's just penology. You're just making this up. It can't be the tribe of Dan. We're going to take a deeper dive. The glory of the great gods, my lords, by whose reliable oracular answer, marched to and fro, having no rival, I left for the kings, my sons, for all time. This was Sargon II and his Cypriot epic. This is a picture of the stele he erected in Cyprus. I forget what city it was in Cyprus. He erected it in, but you can see the inscriptions, or you can see the inscriptions on the side of the stele, right? Now check this out. This is also in the Kition stele. Remember Cyprus, right? And 7 kings of the land of Aya, a district of the land of Yadanana. So it was a district in Yadanana called the land of Aya. So, but he's calling the island of Cyprus Yadanana. It wasn't Cyprus at the time. It was Yadanana in the 8th century BC, who are situated a journey of 7 days away in the middle of the sea. They're clearly tied to the sea peoples, obviously. They clearly migrated into Cyprus or Kittim, right? In the middle of the sea of the setting sun, and their locations are distant, so that since the far off days of the taking over of Syria, that's a variant. It says, and until now, none among the kings, my ancestors of Assyria and Babylonia, had heard the name of their land from far off in the middle of the sea. They heard the deeds that I had performed in the lands of Chaldea and Hatti. Their hearts palpitated and fright fell upon them. They brought to me in Babylon gold, silver, furniture made of ebony and boxwood, the manufacturer, the treasures of their land, and kissed my feet. He's saying that the Denyen were giving him tribute, bowing to him, traveling all the way to Babylon from Sargon II, called the Kition stele. Huh. You're just making it up. It can't be the tribe of Dan. This is another archaeologist substantiating our claims. This is from the book Before Columbus, Links Between the Old World and Ancient America by Cyrus H. Gordon. right? Listen to what he says in page 108. It says, after I give the caption, it says, in his book, he states that they later sailed from Greece to other European coast lands, including Ireland and Denmark. Talking about those, Denyen, they traveled after Assyrian conquest into Cyprus and to the regions when they were pushing them out, right? Into Denmark and even Ireland. This is what Gordon relates with all of these claims. It says, a group of sea people bore the name of Dan. The Bible tells how a segment of the seafaring, Judges 5:17, that's the Deborah song, Danites were part of the tribal system of ancient Israel. The Danites were widespread. The Danites were widespread. The Danites were widespread. Cyprus was called Danun, the island of Danun. The same people were called Danuna, and under this name they appear as rulers of the plain of Adana in Cilicia. Greek tradition has their eponymous ancestor Danaus, Dan, migrating from the Nile Delta to Greece. So archaeologists are saying that patriarchal Danite figures, right, and the name of Dan are all widespread because of the migrations of Dan, and even substantiates the claims that this is the tribe of Dan. This is Dan. This is an archaeologist. Oh man, it gets bumpier. Hold on to your butts, right? Penology is in effect. Okay, this is the Shekelesh epitaph, right? This is from the 1st century CE, right? And around the 2nd century CE. But notice something. The Shekelesh epitaph discovered near Aegean in Western Anatolia. Remember, Anatolia, Western Anatolia. Dates to around the 1st century CE, written in ancient Greek. It is the oldest complete surviving musical composition. So this is a musical composition, but it's written in ancient Greek script in Anatolia. So who were in these regions of Anatolia? Who brought the Greek script, the Linear A, Paleo? Who brought it? Who brought it? Obviously, who was here? Who was writing this? Remember what it said about the original Mycenaeans? They spoke different dialects. They didn't have the Linear A until it was brought. Other early Greek inscriptions, right? This was found in Ephesus. Paul is all throughout Asia Minor. Peter writes to Asia Minor, Pontus. This is Anatolia. This is Turkey. Okay? Paul was from Turkey. The ark descended on Urartu or Ararat, where? In Turkey. Early Greek inscriptions in Anatolia appear in places like Miletus and Ephesus, dating back to the 8th and 7th century BCE. It's well documented that these early alphabetic texts found on stone or pottery mark the adoption of the Greek alphabet in the region. They show how, they show how Greek writing was developing in Anatolia. Paleo-Greek again. The Diplion inscription found on a vase. You can't tell me this ain't black people. You know, we hitting the jerk, pop locking. Wait till you see what's written on here. It says, the Diplion inscription discovered at the Diplion Gate Cemetery in Athens, Greece, dates to around 740 BC. Was Alexander and them and the Edomites ruling in? No. When we go into our segment of iconoclasm, clearly they weren't. Because the original Greeks were Israelites. It says the Dorian stock. The Dipleon inscription discovered at the Dipleon Gate Cemetery in Athens, Greece, dates to around 740 BCE, 8th century BCE. Written in early ancient Greek, archaic Greek alphabet, it is one of the oldest known examples of Greek alphabetic writing. The text is inscribed on a ceramic wine jug, oiniko, and appears to record a prize for a dancing contest. The brother was in there. Don't all that. You know they was. It was pop locking in Egypt. This brother won a vase. He like, yeah, I want it. Man, I pop locked on y'all. Right? Took the vase and got ghost and started drinking wine, probably from the vase, and got bent and asked the father to forgive him after. Right? He won this person won a dancing contest, y'all. But the point is, ancient Greek and Anatolia. But I thought that language originated in Greece. It clearly did not, because it migrated from the east. And Israelites have the same similar script, practically the sister script. It says, showing both early literacy in social life and geometric period Greece. This is a book called Paleo-Hebrew is Paleo-Greek. Oh, y'all thought it was just Hebrew is Greek? By Travis Wayne Goodsell. Now, he goes into this book a little bit to kind of say how it's not a Phoenician script. And I can see the point he's trying to make. But when we talk about it being a Phoenician script, it's talking about the landmass. So he's even saying that Paleo-Hebrew is Paleo-Greek. I wonder, that's very interesting, because obviously it came from the Hebrews. Obviously. We're going to go a little bit into the Dardanians. These people are important to know. First Chronicles 2 and 4. The Dardanians are the modern day Trojans. And Tamar, his daughter-in-law, bare him Phares and Zerah. All the sons of Judah were 5. And the sons of Zerah, Zimri, and Ethan, and Heman, and Calcol, remember the Colchis, where were they? And Anatolia, the Colchians, or the Calchi. And Dara, remember there's 2 nations of Judah, Phares and Zerah, and Zerah's sons. So knowing that the king came from Phares, what would that do to Zerah? They would push and migrate and establish other aristocracies around them. Because who inhabited Jerusalem? The line of David from Phares. But these kings that came from Zerah, they ruled in other places of Europe, Anatolia, etc. So notice in red, it's Dara, right? 5 of them in all. And Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom of Egypt. For he was wiser than all men, and Ethan the Ezrahite, and Heman, and Calcol, and Dara, the sons of Mahol. And his fame was in all nations round about. So these are the different titles of Dardanians, just like you have with Dan, right, in their respective locations. So the checker, which we learned about, when you read about them in Greek mythos, when the Trojans intermarried, they intermarried with the line of Teucer, or the Teucrians, who actually helped them and aided them in the Trojan War. Okay, when you think about our bloodline, when you think about the royalty of how kings would offer their daughters, it was a very sacred thing. So this is why they would get deified as fertility gods and fertility goddesses, and we descend from the god, etc., etc., because that line came from them. And at that time, they were mighty, wealthy rulers and warriors. Okay, you mean Samson? Samson had a cult, the cult of Hercules. Okay, man who broke down pillars. That noise abroad. Even they find that story in Mexico. Okay, in the what's it called? The what's the book that I'm looking for? What's their sacred book? I just slipped my mind, but I'll get to it. So you had the name of Dardanians, sometime linked to them, the checker. They're linked to the Dardanoid Trojans, known from Egyptian records, and they settled in Canaan or Dor. The Thekel, variant spelling of checker. So they intermarried, right? So Tukri, Tusar, Tukrian, mythic ancestor of Trojans. Early Trojan myth, Troad. The Troad region was northwest Anatolia, Turkey, region near Troy. Dardanoi. They were also called Dardanoi, associated with Troy ancestor Dardanus. Inhabitants of the Troad Anatolia near legendary Troy. Dardani, variant of Dardanoi, same as Dardanoi, Troad, Anatolia region. And that they all descend from Dara, Darda, and in some traditions, they call him Dardanus in Jewish tradition. Darda, right? Just going to a little brief synopsis, meaning pearl of wisdom, one of the wise men to whom Solomon is compared. He was either a son of Mahol or a son of Zerah. Mahol could just simply be an epithet, son of Judah, where the corresponding name in the same list is given as Dara. In rabbinic lore, the name has been interpreted as Dor Dia, the generation of knowledge, the generation of the wilderness. Let's see what Dor means. Dor means generation, age, period of time dwelling, generation, age from H1755. Let's get some information about Dardanus from Dionysius of Halicarnassus. We're going to learn about Halicarnassus as well. I told y'all it's going to be a bit long, but we almost there, y'all. But I hope that y'all are being edified. Okay? First century BCE, Roman Antiquities, Book 1, Chapter 61. That the Trojans too were a nation as truly Greek. But hold on. That's all the way in Anatolia, northwest Anatolia, as you can see on the map. You look to the middle or the last to the right. You see where that mount is? Mount Ida. I wonder what Mount Ida translates to. They're going to tell you something spooky. There's also a Mount Ida where? In Crete. I wonder what apostasy the Israelites was getting into in Crete. Paul mentions it, right? But it's Western Anatolia. But if you look north of Troy, you can see it says Dardania. And above that, it says Dardanus. An actual town. And you see the strait just under the Thracian, right? That's called the Dardanelles. From Darda, their patriarch. Remember, they said they descended from Dardanus. It says that the Trojans too were a nation as truly Greek as any and formerly came from the Peloponnesus, has long been asserted by some authors and shall be briefly related by me also. Now, they're saying, oh, they came from the Peloponnesus. Okay, why? Because that's where other traditions from the Roman tradition, where they speculate, because there's something written in the Virgil Aeneid, because that family was also found in Italy. When you deal with the Romans and you deal with that war in Greek mythology, the Trojan War, that was Dan, the Achaeans or the Danuns, fighting with Judah. Okay, the actual war. So they're saying they possibly came from the Peloponnesus because they were also in those regions. So it says, the account concerning them as follows. Atlas was the first king of the country now called Arcadia, and he lived near the mountain called Dalmatius. He had 7 daughters who are said to be numbered among the constellations under the name of the Pleiades. Zeus married one of these, Electra, and had by her 2 sons, Isis and Dardanus. So you see that the exacerbating of history and hyperbole. But one thing that is all traditions agree with is the line of Dardanus. All traditions agree with this. Dardanus, Erycthonius, Tros, Ilus. This is where you get Iliad from. This was another name of Troy, right? Laomedon, Priam. He's famous in the Virgil Aeneid. Hector, Paris line, Aeneas, surviving the Trojan line, right? So Aeneas is well known in the Aeneid, right? Oops, excuse me. This is Dardanus and Greek tradition. This is from Virgil Aeneid, right? Book 3. Now, after the Trojan War, they go to Latinus, right? A king in Italy. And this is what Latinus responds in this tradition, responds to what he says when the Trojans come to meet him. Prostrate, we fall to earth, and a voice comes to our ears. Long-suffering sons of Dardanus. Remember, they're coming from Troy. The land which bore you first from your parent stock shall welcome you back to her fruitful bosom. So they're just welcoming them back, like, listen, your home is my home. Y'all come from here too. Seek out your ancient mother. They're the house of Aeneas. Aeneas, remember, is a descendant of Dardanus. He was a Trojan, a ruler. Shall lord it over all lands, even his children's children and the race that shall be born of them. This is where the Romans say they descend from. Not the Romans you see that look like Edomites. I'm talking about the original Black Romans who introduced themselves and made it in Greek mythology, okay, which was actual history. We call it Trojan War. Book 7, and this is where it's what they say in Book 7. Such was the temple of the gods in which Latinus, seated on the ancestral throne, called the Trojans to him in the palace, and as they entered, spoke first with a calm expression. Sons of Dardanus. He's calling the Trojans sons of Dardanus. For your city and people are not unknown to us, and we heard of your journey towards us on the seas. What do you wish? What reason? What need has brought your ships to Ausonian shores over so many Azore waves? That's what Latinus said to them, right? Dardanus in Greek tradition. This is what they responded to when Latinus said that. This is what Aeneas said, Book 7. And I remember in truth, though the tale is obscured by time, that the Auruncan elders, now during the Samnite Wars, when Edomites began to come into power around the 400s, 5th century BC, it is said that they eradicated the Auruncan, okay? The Edomites began to rule. That's how they got into that Greek seat in position. Told how Dardanus, right, sprung from these shores, penetrated the cities of Phrygian Ida. Phrygia, we hear that in the Bible, right? Why is Christ talking to John about what's going on with Anatolia? Israelites in Asia Minor? And Thracian Samos, that is now called Samothrace, right? It says, that was Latinus. And this is the response of Aeneas. It says, the founder of our race is Jove. Jove is Jupiter. Sancunianthan said that the word Jupiter comes from Yehut Patar, which means Judah, father. Oh, yeah. Look it up. Ask Garfield. Y'all want me to post his messages to me when he tried to criticize me on this and screenshot it for my next PowerPoint? He said, you might be right on this one. It says, the founder of our race is Jove. The sons of Dardanus enjoy Jove as their ancestor. Our king himself is of Jove's high race. Trojan Aeneas sends us to your threshold. The fury of the storm that poured from fierce Mycenae and crossed the plains of Ida, and how the two worlds of Europe and Asia clashed. So Asia and Europe are clashing, they're coming together, right? It says, that was Aeneas's response. The Danuns, Achaeans, or Greeks at that time, were invading the Troad region, okay? Or the Trojans. Now, Mount Ida, remember when Mount Ida, and sorry, my phone just died on Clubhouse. Y'all can cross over. If y'all could get people from the YouTube, have them cross over. My phone died. Can someone just, if they can, It says, this is what Tacitus from Histories, book 5, section 2, Mount Ida from Tacitus. I'm making this up. Mount Ida, right? This is what Tacitus said. The Jews are said to have been refugees from the island, excuse me, are said to be refugees from the island of Crete, who settled in the remotest corner of Libya in the days when, according to the story, Saturn was driven from his throne by the aggression of Jupiter. This is a deduction from the name Judea. Wait, hold on. It's a deduction from the name Judea. So when they say they descended from Jove, their ancestor, they began to worship Judah, believe it or not. It's called euhemerism. Okay? This is why Cornelius, when you go into Scipio Africanus Major, he said he descended from Jupiter. And he would pray in the temple of Jupiter. Say he descended from his race. It says, by which they became known. So they became known as Judea. But he's saying it's a deduction from the name Judea. The word is to be regarded as a barbarous lengthening of Idea. Ida. The name of the people dwelling around the famous Mount Ida in Crete. So hold on. Mount Ida in Crete. Mount Ida. Where? In Anatolia. Seeing the connections? Dardanus, Troy, Dardania. A few authorities hold that in the reign of Isis, the surplus populations of Egypt was evacuated to neighboring lands under the leadership of Harusulamis and Judas. Harusulamis is Moses, right? Judah going into the land of Judah, etc. So they're making these are caricatures. It says, or epithets of their names. Many assure us that the Jews are descended from those Ethiopians who were driven by fear and hatred to immigrate from their home country when Cepheus was king. There are some who say that a motley collection of landless Assyrians occupied a part of Egypt and then built cities of their own. So where did Israelites come from? The region of Assyria, occupied a part of Egypt and then built cities of their own, inhabiting the lands of the Hebrews and the nearer parts of Syria. Others, again, find a famous ancestry for the Jews in the Ptolemai. The Ptolemai settled in southwest Anatolia. Look it up. They said that they descended from Jupiter, who are mentioned with respect in the epics of Homer. This tribe is supposed, to have founded Jerusalem and named it after themselves. This is from Tacitus, the Histories. Going back to the Dorians, Histories, Book 1, Section 56, Herodotus of Halicarnassus, 5th century BC, translated by G.C. Macaulay. By these lines, when they came to him, Croesus, who was Croesus? Croesus was the king that went to the oracle at Delphi, right, and believed that he could defeat who? Cyrus. He called Cyrus a hybrid mule. But listen to what he said. Now, Cyrus jacked him up because he thought Cyrus was going to come in the winter, and Cyrus came right in the winter and destroyed Lydia, right, which was that region that we're talking about now. When the bear came up off his side, had 3 ribs in his mouth. That was Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt, right? Croesus was pleased more than by all the rest, for he supposed that a mule would never be ruler of the Medes instead of a man. He's calling Cyrus a mule. And accordingly, that he himself and his heirs would never cease from their rule. Then after this, he gave thought to inquire which people of the Hellenes he should esteem the most powerful and gain over to himself as friends. This is 6th century BC, right? And there are people being called Hellenes. Listen to what Croesus says, right? And he said, he should esteem the most powerful and gain over to himself as friends. Who was the most prominent people or preeminent of the Hellenes? Let's read. It says, in inquiring, he found that the Lacedaemonians, we read about them in Maccabees, and the Athenians, we just read about them, had the preeminence, the first of the Dorian, and the others of the Ionian race. So they were completely separate than the Dorian. For these were the most eminent races in ancient time. The second being a Pelasgian, that's the Philistines, and the first a Hellenic race. So who was ahead of the Philistines? Dorians, Lacedaemonians. When you go into the Lacedaemonians, that specific title, it was the specific high race of the Spartans. That was the priesthood of Jupiter. Okay, they were of the aristocratic element of the Spartans, or the royal bloodline. Just like David within Israel, or the royal bloodline, David will be known as, the descendants of David will be as the high race of Israel, right? It says, and the one never migrated from its place in any direction, while the other it's talking about the Dorians, meaning they were migrating, and the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians, they were migrating all over the place, right? It says, while the other was very exceedingly given to wanderings. Remember that scripture said you will be wanderers? For in the reign of Deucalion, this race dwelt in Pithitus, and in the time of Doros. Now they say the Dorians descended from Doros. How could they, if Herodotus of Halicarnassus is saying during a specific time, they already existed and were migrated already. The son of Helen in the land lying below Assa and Olympos, which is called Histatius. And when it was driven from Histatius by the sons of Cadmus, it dwelt in Pindos and was called Macedonian. And thence it moved afterwards to Dryopus. And from Dryopus, it came finally to Peloponnesus and began to be called Dorian. This is ethnology of Europe. This ain't just archaeology. This is what an ethnologist by the name of R.G. Latham, right? That's what he says. Page 133 in the highlights. I'm going to read briefly. Such are the reasons for believing that the true and undoubted Hellenic area was at the time of the Homeric poems quite small enough to have received the whole of its population from some other country, and that by means of boats and ships. So who was Homer talking about the most? Dorians, Danuns, Dardanians, Trojans. This is from ethnologists, right? Going into the next page. If so, the Dorian conquests were only partially Hellenic, so that there is at least an element of intermixture here. Others, in the highlight, in 134, are referable to the eastern coast. Asia Minor, Egypt, and Phoenicia all contributed to mix the Hellenic blood. Oh, boy. 135. I admit the likelihood sagaciously suggested by Colonel Muir of the parts between Syria and Egypt being in reality Semitic rather than Egyptian, yet passing from Egyptian in the eyes of a Greek, yet passing for Egyptian in the eyes of a Greek, so that much which is really Phoenician or Jewish may have been considered as Coptic. Nevertheless, a few fragmentary facts seem to indicate a true introduction of Egyptian ideas and blood. The name of the city Thebes, common to both Greece and Egypt, is one of these. Now, who do they say colonized or founded Thebes? Cadmus. Cadmus came from Egypt. Clearly, it says that. Came from Phoenicia and then into Thebes. Go ahead. Yep. Right. Right. That when you read the Bora, it says, why was Dan in ships? They already was doing migrations away. They already were doing migrations away before settling. You see, when Judah and Simeon were not mentioned, what was they doing in the time of Deborah? Why was Dan in ships? They was already out there during that time, right? Now, look at where it started at. Look, it says, by Semitic is meant Jewish and Phoenician collectively. So under the name Phoenician, you can also consider Jews or Israelites. This is an ethnologist. Page 136 says, farther remarks upon the assumption that the Phoenicians only and not the Egyptians were a maritime people will occur in the ethnology of Crete. The influences from Syria and Palestine were either Phoenician or Jewish, and by no means exclusively Phoenician. The settling of the sons and daughters of Judah into captivity beyond the sea is a fact attested by Isaiah. Neither do I think that the eponymus of the Argive Denai was other than that of the Israelite tribe of Dan. Only we are so used to confine ourselves to the soil of Palestine and our consideration of the history of the Israelites. So what he's saying is like, why is it, he's going to go into say, why is it that we could say every other race traveled from here to there, but it's speculation when it comes time to say, oh, these Israelite tribes migrated from here. He's going to go into explaining as an ethnologist why that is. It says, only we are so used to confine ourselves to the soil of Palestine, meaning, like we keep saying, Israelites ruled beyond the times of judges in other places. There were other regions, right? During the times of Solomon, etc., during the times of the kings, right? It says, we confine ourselves to the soil of Palestine in our consideration of the history of the Israelites, that we treat them as if they were abscripti glebe, right? Just, like we just brush them under the rug or like treat them like, you know what I'm saying? Like it can't be because it's adjoined to the Bible, and ignore the share they may have taken in the ordinary history of the world. So everybody else has an ordinary history. We debate all day about people in their existence. He's saying, why do we confine them to just the soil of Palestine as if they were not a migratory people? Like priests of great sanctity, they are known in the holy places only. Look at that. When you say non-Jew, we got to confine the word Gentiles to non-Israelites because you're confining them to be in holy places only. No, they were in Greek apostasy, Egyptian apostasy, Samaritan apostasy, Assyrian apostasy, Babylonian apostasy. They were in these temples too.
We were the only people that went into all these different captivities. But
Right. Makes no sense. Like priests of great sanctity, they are known in the holy places only. Yet the seaports between Tyre and Ascalon of Dan, Ephraim, and Asher must have followed the history of seaports in general and not have stood on the coast for nothing. What a light would be thrown on the origin of the name of Peloponnesus and the history of the Pelopid family, if bona fide nation of Pelopes with unequivocal affinities in contemporary annals had existed on the coast of Asia, right? Who would have hesitated to connect the two? Yet with the Denai and the tribe of Dan, this is the case, and no one connects them. He's saying nobody connects the tribe of Dan. You don't want to connect them to the world that's connected in trade and connected in these routes and connected in Greece. You want to confine them to just being holy people with a priesthood hat on in Palestine. In these remarks, I by no means say that the resemblance is not accidental, although my opinion is against it being so. I only say that a conclusion which would have been suggested if the tribe of Dan had been Gentiles has been neglected because they were Jews. So he's saying because Dan went off and they were considered Gentiles, they don't connect them because it's almost like a disdain to the Jews because they're living as Gentiles or Hellenes. Page 139. The extent of the Hellenic era at the date of the Homeric catalog of ships has been given. The majority of Aegean islands were then other than Greek. On the coast, however, of Asia Minor, portions of what was afterwards Ionia had been colonized. By who? Dorian Greeks, Israelites. I'm going to get into that. There are Dorians, however, in Crete. The Hellenes are simply a population of Thessaly. The Pelasgi allied to the Trojans. So the Philistines was allied to Trojans and circumscribed in area. Denoi, Argioi, and Achaeoi, which is Achaeans, are the nearest approaches to an equivalent to the subsequent term Hellenes. He's saying that Denoi, Argoi, Trojans, all of them are the equivalent of Hellene. Come on, people. Page 140. On the coast of Asia, there is an alias, there's an Aeolus, a Doris, and an Ionia, all of which the Hellenes look upon as settlements from corresponding parts of Greece. And there is division of the Hellenes themselves of considerable political importance into two classes, the Dorian and Ionian. So there's a separate ethnic class of the Hellenes, but the Hellenes, the Dorians are called Hellenes, so are the Ionians, but they're a separate class ethnically. A difference between the original Italian populations, or a difference in the elements which were supplied in Greece itself, thus admixture and alliance with the original population of Thessaly and South Macedon, rather than with the Epirus, may have determined the Aeolian character. Admixture and alliance with the South Epirotes, rather than the Thessalians, the Doric, Semitic elements, the Ionic, right? So he's clearly lining up the Doric people as a separate people group, Semitic, right? We could clearly see this. It says, this is Robert Gordon Latham, right? An English ethnologist and philologist. Oh, you're getting this from a white man. Remember what I said earlier. His tongue shall fall upon themselves. Their tongues shall fall upon themselves. He shall accomplish a diligent search. It's a good thing that I had a screenshot from 5 years ago. Look at this. Look at the devil himself. Look at what Dorian is 5 years ago versus the revised. They're on to something. Dorian is a masculine given name of Greek origin. In Greek, the meaning of the name Dorian is of Doris, a district of ancient Greece. Now that's speculation. Or of Doris. Now watch what it says. A legendary Greek hero. Doris was the son of Helen of Sparta, who was the daughter of Zeus and Leda. Doris was the founder of the Dorian tribe, and the most likely origin of his name is the Hebrew word Doron, meaning gift. Because they even say Spartan was gifted to them as some type of sign from their god. And they're saying it could possibly be, it came from the Hebrew word Doron. Remember Dordia? Remember we went into that and we was talking about generation of pearls or knowledge, right? But why in the revised version, you can't read when it says, this is 5 years later. It don't say Doris was the founder of the Dorian tribe and most likely the origin. It says most likely the origin of his name is the Hebrew word Doron. Why'd they take that out? Oh yeah, I had this locked in. Dorian presence in Asia. Asia Minor, y'all. Right? This is Pausanias, Description of Greece, chapter 5, section 3. They say that these were not the reasons of the Lacedaemonians in going to war, but that they had formed designs on their country through covetousness, as in others in their actions, bringing forward against them their treatment of the Arcadians and of the Argives. Remember, it's Dan. For in both cases, they have never been satisfied with their continual encroachments. When Croesus sent them presents, they were the first to become friends with the barbarian. after he had reduced the other Greeks of Asia Minor and all the Dorians who live on the Carian mainland. So the Dorians in Asia Minor were also considered Greeks. Carian is Anatolia, where you get Horite or the Kori people. Okay? It says right here, where you see right here, all these highlights, this is called the Doric Hexapolis. In the blue is the region of the Dorians. Now remember, there was different groups of the Hellenes or the Greeks in Asia. Greek. We already seen the Greek inscriptions, etc. The Doric Hexapolis was a group of 6 Dorian city-states established after about 1100 BCE. Following the Dorian migrations, the cities Lindos, Ialissus, Camiros, Kos, Conitis, and Halicarnassus flourished during the Archaic period, particularly from the 8th to 7th centuries BCE. Their federation focused on shared religious festivals, and it dissolved around the mid-6th century BC. Let's see something interesting in the Bible. Remember that Doric Hexapolis we just learned about? This is in First Maccabees when they were writing letters back and forth. This is First Maccabees 12, 19 through 23. This is a copy of the letter which they sent to Onias, Arius, king of the Spartans. Wait, there were no Israelite kings. Okay. To Onias, the high priest, greeting. It has been found in writing concerning the Spartans and the Jews that they are brethren and are the family of Abraham. This is the RSV. And now that we have learned this, please write us concerning your welfare. We, on our part, write to you that your cattle and your property belong to us and ours belong to you. We therefore command that our envoys report to you accordingly. They wasn't going to treat them like they treated good old Winnemoon hijack. But there was family. Listen to First Maccabees 14, 38 through 40. In view of these these things, King Demetrius confirmed him in the high priesthood, and he made him one of the king's friends and paid him high honors. For he had heard that the Jews were addressed by the Romans as friends and allies and brethren, and that the Romans had received the envoys of Simon with honor. First Maccabees 15, 22 through 25. Remember the Doric Hexapolis. It's literally called the Doric Hexapolis of Asia. The consul wrote the same thing to Demetrius. Remember, this is Greek. The Doric Hexapolis is considered Hellenes in Greek. The consul wrote the same thing to Demetrius, the king of Attalus and Ararathes and Arsaces, and to all the countries, and to Samps, and to the Spartans, and to Delos, and to Mendos, and to Sicyon, and to Caria, where the Doric Hexapolis was, and to Samos, and to Pamphylia, and to Lycia, and to Halicarnassus, the Doric Hexapolis, and to Rhodes, the Doric Hexapolis, and to Phaselis, and to Cos, the Doric Hexapolis, and to Cede, and to Arcadis, and Gortania, and Canitis, and Cyprus, and Cyrene. They also sent a copy of these things to Simon, the high priest. Antiochus the king besieged Dor anew, continually throwing his forces against it and making engines of war. And he shut Trypho up and kept him from going out or in. Now, why would he do that? Because Dor was obviously a connection to that world, and Antiochus wanted it. But why are Israelites writing to other Israelites as family members in the Doric Hexapolis and the areas round about? Because they were Israelite Doric Greeks. Going on more deep dives, y'all. Yeah. That helped with the Spartans? Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Right. Right. This is the Odyssey by Homer, written roughly 800 to 700 BCE. based on events from circa 1190 to 1180 BC. Wandering through the many cities of men in sore distress. Yet even so will I tell thee what thou dost ask and inquire. There is a land called Crete in the midst of the wine dark sea, a fair, rich land begirt with water, and therein are many men, past counting, in 90 cities. They have not all the same speech, but their tongues are mixed. There dwell Achaeans, their great-hearted native Cretans, and the Kydonians and Dorians of waving plumes. What are the waving plumes? You see that man in the ship? You remember the sea peoples when they had those plumes? Where did the Spartans get that? Where did the Lacedaemonians get that? Right? The plumes of the Dorians, going back to Israelite culture, and goodly Pelasgians. Even the knights, they used to put the feathers in their helmets, right? And goodly Pelasgians, these are Philistines. Among their cities is the great city Knossos. Knossos was where Epimenides was from, once again, where a lot of that poetry came out of, where Paul was rebuking those Israelites in Acts 17. Where Minos reigned when 9 years old, he that held converse with great Zeus. Homer, Odyssey, book 19, section 175 to 80. Here is another depiction, right, of the Greeks of that time. Black. This is Dorians came from Northern Kingdom Israel. This is from the book, The Forgotten Tribe of Naphtali and the Phoenicians. Okay? Right? By Steve Phillips. What we have taken to be Doric Greek actually turns out to be Israelite in origin. Who's the we? What we have taken to be Doric Greek actually turns out to be Israelite in origin. Archaeologists excavating the ancient city of Dor in northern Israel, for example, have noticed that Greek influences appeared in Dor long before the Greeks arrived. When he say long before the Greeks arrived, he's talking about those fake ones, the Alexanders, right? Because Israelite, they founded civilizations of Greek heritages, Greek mythos and Greek epic and Greek civilization and colonies, etc. Even the language, right? So back to First Maccabees 1, it was before those claiming to be Greeks arrived, the Alexanders, etc. Right? So I'm going to quickly just back out of here and go to this. I have to go to this link, right? Because this is important. This is important right here. This is from the department. This is from the department of, 1 second, it's not letting me scroll down. Let me see if I can just put it down. Oh, it's not letting me scroll down. For some reason. Excuse me. One second. Well, basically, this is just simply saying how Dora was one of the most scenic sites in Israel, right? I'm kind of upset it's not letting me scroll down here. And y'all seen me once again sick with no haircut, battling practically the flu. Looking crazy as all ever. Just call me a Nazarite from right now. Right, hold on. But anyway. All right, let's just get out of here. Right? I'll provide the link in the description again, right? Let's go back to this information because there's more, because it's saying the Hellenization of the East. It's just going into how architecture shows how there was Greek culture long before the so-called Greeks came up, so-called Alexanders came up. Greek culture was already popular, vast, well situated, and anchored by Dorians, Achaeans, Israelites, not Ionians or Aeolians. This is Greek and Israelite culture. This is Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 3:6. But in the holy place, he placed a table, speaking of Moses, like those at Delphi. Now, the Dorians were mocking something that Moses, an architect, receiving a blueprint of what the Lord gave him for design. They found something similar in Delphi. This is where the Dorians would go and get the oracle from the oracle at Delphi. It was normally a prophetess who they called the Pythia, right? Pythia, where you get the word python, right? I wonder why Dan was a serpent in the way, right? That causes the rider to fall backward, right? Because they were getting into all of this, all into the mythos. They were at the forefront of it, right? This is when you get Python. This is even when you when Britney Spears, when she was wearing that Python around her, I'm a slave for you. She was trying to be in the same energy or that same vibration of that oracle at Delphi as the Pythia, right? Its length was 2 cubits, right? It's talking about a table. And its breadth 1 cubit, and its height 3 spans. It had feet also, the lower half of which were complete feet, resembling those which the Dorians put to their bedsteads. But the upper parts towards the table were wrought in a square form. So the Dorians had similar architecture or similar culture or similar blueprint to the holy place table, their bedsteads. This is also from Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, book 8:5-2. And it reads, this house was a large and curious building and was supported by many pillars, which Solomon built to contain a multitude for hearing causes and taking cognizance of suits. It was sufficiently capacious to contain a great body of men who would come together to have their causes determined. It was 100 cubits long and 50 broad and 30 high, supported by quadrangular pillars, which were all of cedar. But its roof was according to the Corinthian order, one with folding doors. Who the Corinthians? The descendants of the Spartans. And their adjoining pillars of equal magnitude, each fluted with 3 cavities, which building as at once firm and very ornamental. Josephus is making this connection. Doric Spartans. Hello, y'all. I never knew Edomites, so-called white people, to be wearing cornrows like this, right? These are Dorian Greeks, the Spartan sect, okay? Knowing that the Dorian Greeks settled in places like the Peloponnese, Crete, and various Aegean islands, and founding city-states like Sparta and Corinth and Achaea, we can make connections to their Shemitic heritage and influences as the sea peoples that were linked to the biblical tribes of Israel. The Dorian dialect and their cultural influences, especially in military and art, left a significant mark on ancient Greece. 1 Corinthians 11:14. Now, notice the long braids. Who did the Spartans say they descended from? We're going to get into that. They said they descended from Hercules. Hercules slayed a lion. Oh, Samson slayed a lion. What tribe was Samson from? Dan. In mythos, they say, when you deal with he killed a lion, a lot of people don't understand during that time, lions were lions. What we see now are kitty cats. Yeah, they were huge. And not only were they more territorial, there were people at that time that were like, we cannot detain this lion. It was killing people in the air. It was consuming everything round about. So this wasn't just no regular punk lion. Samson slew a lion that was fierce to that world. So this is why he's praised and worshiped in that occult, right? The occult of Hercules, right? It says, the Dorian dialect and the cultural influences, especially in military and art, left a significant mark on ancient Greece. These are Spartans. Look at the plumes and the cornrows. It wasn't dreadlocks, y'all. It were plaits. They were braids, cornrows. Even look at the women. Now, why is Paul telling the Corinthians who descended from the Spartans? Why is he telling them this? Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? You know why? Because the Corinthians were still a part of that occultic worship of their long hair. It was really a stumbling block to them. You want to know why? But just look at these brothers and these sisters. These are called cores, right? The women are called cores. We see how they chipping off the noses. These are brothers, man. Brothers. This is from Plutarch. It says they wore their hair long when they passed out of the class of ephebes, and when danger was near, they took particular care of it, combing and arranging it. Plutarch adds Lycurgus's explanation. He used to say that long hair makes the handsome more comely and the ugly more terrible. This is what the Spartans were really into. You can see the images of them being shades of brown. You can see them hunting, and you can see them with the cornrows, right? This is from late first, early second century CE. This reflects Spartan custom as preserved in Roman period Greek literature, explicitly tying long hair to fear, intimidation, and martial identity. Some of them were exercising naked, and others were combing their hair. You mean that the Spartans, before Alexander and them, were exercising naked? Yes, Israelites did that. Sorry, but yes, that Greek culture was pioneered by Israelites. Okay? Dorians, Spartans. You see the cornrows again? Describing Persian scouts observing the Spartans before battle, this is what he noticed. This was histories by Herodotus, right? So the scouts were saying, the scouts of Persia was like, yo, they was wrestling naked. They had long hair and all that, combing their hair. So why is Paul saying, is it a shame? Is he saying you can't grow your hair? There's a reason why Paul is saying that, because it was a part of that occult, right? This is much earlier than Plutarch and confirms the practice before Thermopylae, showing that Spartan hair care was ritualized, public, and deliberate before battle. Do y'all see the connections? Braids and black Greeks, the braided truth. This is Greece in the 600s BC. Look at these true indigenous Greeks, the Spartan order, etc. Judges 16 and 13. And Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web, the 7 locks of my head. This is where you get the Spartans saying they descended from who? Hercules. This is why they say that the Dorian invasion was called what? The return of the Heraclidae, to take away the migrational patterns in hyperbole, make it hyperbole and exaggerate it to make it, plausible for theater, etc., poetry, etc. But clearly they got that from Samson, and I'm not the only one who says that. Such is the story told by the Lacedaemonian. Excuse me. Such is the story told by the Lacedaemonians, but by no other Greeks. Let's read that again. Such is the story told by the Lacedaemonians, but by no other Greeks. But I, in what I write, follow the Greek report and hold that the Greeks are right in recording these kings of the Dorians as far back as to Perseus, son of Danae. Oh my gosh. Wherein they make no mention of the god, and in proving the said kings to be Greek, for by Perseus's time they had come to be reckoned as Greeks. As far back as Perseus, I say, and I take the matter no further than that, because none is named as the mortal father of Perseus, as Amphitryon is named father of Hercules. It is plain, then, that I have right reason on my side when I say that the Greek record is right as far back as to Perseus, farther back than that, if the king's ancestors in each generation from Danae, daughter of Acrisius, upward be reckoned, then the leaders of the Dorians will be shown to be true born Egyptians. Means they came out of Egypt. This is Herodotus, man. Right? Book 6, chapter 53. Just to get some biblical text, we almost done. Exodus 2 and 11. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, because they was in Egypt, Dorians. Eventually, one of his brethren, and they said, an Egyptian, concerning Moses, delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock. Exodus 1 and 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. For Joseph was in Egypt already, and Joseph died, and all his brethren, all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Excuse me, I'm under the weather. Sparta was gifted from Tyrannus, 7th century BC, going back to Doron, right? Possibly meaning gift in the Hebrew. For Zeus, son of Kronos, these are different epithets of patriarchs, and husband of fair crown Hera, has given this city Sparta to the Heraclidae, with whom we the Dorians left windy Erineos and came to the broad island of Pelops, because they were migrating back and forth. They were migrating all throughout these regions, but they say that they come from the Heraclidae, right? Hercules. So here is when you go into Dorian, there's a section in Wikipedia that says chosen Greeks. This is a man, Jonathan Hall. He says that there has to be some connection to them being gifted Sparta, or some people of the gift. Who was the people of the gift? Why did they revise Dorian, the Hebrew word? Because they know that these were Hebrews, and they kept, even though it was the left-hand side many of the times, right? They kept some of these same prophecies and promises with the people of the gift, etc. That fragment was from Eunomia, fragment 2, west by Tertius of the 7th century BC. And now we're done, right? Now read the New Testament. Shalom. Galatians 3 and 28. There is neither Jew nor Greek. Where's Galatia? And Anatolia. Where's Ephesus? And Anatolia. Where's Paul from? Anatolia. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female. For ye are all one in Christ Jesus, Yahweh Shai. Right? Let's get up out of here. Right?
I wanted to say the fact that there's so many migrations and Israelites are everywhere. If you read and go in the First Chronicles, their genealogy isn't recorded.
Right.
Due to the fact that they migrated so much out of the land, they really just could not be recorded.
Right. And that goes for many of the tribes, even like Naphtali. Notice when the northern kingdom went off, there wasn't much history to be recorded by them in the records. Because remember, they didn't have Hosea. Hosea was prophesying against them. There's only remnants of them, right? Right. I'm trying to see the chat. Where? Oh, okay. So, does everybody understand why I stated the title as such? Is everybody edified on why I said what I said and the many platforms, right, concerning Greek civilization being organized and settled by Israelites. Is everybody clear? Now, when you read the New Testament, you'll understand when Paul running into these priests of Jupiter. Remember, they called themselves the sons of Jove. Who is Jupiter? These are Israelites. Okay? Not the, Alexander the Greek didn't have to go Hellenize them. They were already in that apostasy. They created it. Now, ain't that panology? Right? Ain't that panology? How do you play the audio? How do you play the dang audio? Where's the audio at? Where's the dang audio?
Here for the panology.
There you go. Thank you, Brother Charles. You were here for the panology. I hope you were watching, right? And I want, if possible, I want some advice. If y'all could, create a room after, do something. But spread the news. I believe I represented history very well tonight, right? Sorry that my phone, it wasn't connected to the charger and it died on Clubhouse. But those on Clubhouse, I hope y'all shifted over here. But we're gonna go further into this. Yahweh is coming up with history with Yahweh, right? He's gonna be going into some of this as well with other artifacts and literary sources. Okay.
So from Alexander, House of Kings, can you go into that history and then he conquered the world? Like, because you said they didn't need to be Hellenized, they were Hellenized.
Right. They were Hellenes. They were the originators of it. Right. It's just that he came into power and they adopted those traditions. Right. Before Alexander was going to the Oracle at Delphi, those were Dorians. Right. So we're going to end right there, y'all. I'm going to end right there. Put a 1 in the chat if you feel you were edified. And see, this is why the Most High needed to send Christ to grant them repentance from all of this apostasy, this Greek apostasy, right? Go over the information, right? Get your pens and your pads again and take notes again. Y'all, what's up? Uno, one. All right, shalom, peoples. I love y'all. Hit it again.